A vast battlefield lay buried beneath thick white snow. Corpses were scattered across the frozen ground as a lone figure stood at the center, towering over the fallen like an executioner bathed in silence. His presence radiated an overwhelming killing intent. He did not turn around when he sensed someone approaching from behind. An old man appeared behind him, calm, unshaken, and watching him as if evaluating a tool. The man questioned why he had come when he was supposed to be leading the Eastern conquest. The younger man lowered his head, his fists tightened. Through gritted teeth, he declared that he had returned to defeat him. That answer drew a faint mocking curve to the old man's lips. With crimson eyes filled with cold indifference, he slowly drew his blood-stained sword. He accused the son of having used his army as bait from the very beginning. Asking if he truly believed he had been unaware, the father admitted it without hesitation. He stated bluntly that everything had served a purpose. Those without wings existed only to be sacrificed. Then came the cruel words that shattered whatever hope remained. "Isn't that right, my foolish son?" Each word pierced deeper than any blade. The son, born into the Elmine lineage, the legendary house of war gods sworn to defend royalty, felt the weight of those words crash into his chest. Radek Mame, head of the family, was the most powerful figure in the kingdom. Years ago, he had saved the boy's life during a deadly blizzard. Grateful and indebted, the boy had vowed loyalty and had followed every command without question. He threw himself into battle after battle, believing his devotion would eventually earn recognition. Instead, his childhood had been filled with humiliation. His brothers mocked him constantly. In their world, magical power was symbolized by wings etched upon one's back. The more wings one possessed, the stronger one became. He had none. Branded as wingless, he was treated as inferior. Yet instead of surrendering to shame, he devoted himself to mastering the sword. His body became his only weapon. Through relentless training in combat, he forged strength with determination alone. Over time, he earned loyal companions and built influence through sheer effort. He believed he had finally proven his worth. Hidden among the battlefield's broken landscape, he sensed danger too late. The entire army he commanded had been trapped. An ambush, carefully prepared and executed. Shock turned into despair as realization struck. The trust he placed in his father had been manipulated from the start. He shouted in anguish, demanding to know if this betrayal was the reward for his loyalty. The response was cold silence, followed by a dismissive stare. Radek sneered and asked what use an instrument had once its purpose was fulfilled. He ordered him to vanish. Those words ignited rage beyond control. Driven by fury, the son charged forward, raising his sword and screaming, "Father!" His blade moved in a violent arc, fueled by betrayal and hatred. For a brief moment, it succeeded. The sword grazed Radek's neck, drawing blood. It was the first time the old man's expression shifted. But victory lasted only an instant. From the ground and air, glowing red magical chains burst forth, binding him tightly in place. His own brothers had joined the attack. Even restrained, he fought back wildly, swinging his sword and cutting down enemies surrounding him. The chains tightened brutally, forcing blood from his mouth, yet his resistance did not break. One brother mocked him, asking if he still failed to understand. A wingless existence would always remain powerless. Another sneered that crawling in the snow was the only place he belonged. Pinned down, breathing heavily, he pressed his hand against the freezing ground and demanded to know why they had ever taken him in, if they planned to discard him. Radek stepped closer. Grabbing his hair roughly, he forced him to raise his head and meet his eyes. With a chilling tone, he revealed the truth. He had never needed him, not as a son. What he had needed was the power hidden within his body. 7 wings. The revelation shocked him. 7 wings. Radek's cruel smile widened as he admitted that the boy's mother had served her purpose. She had simply been the vessel to produce the power he desired. The confession shattered everything. Moments later, blades pierced through his body. His screams echoed across the battlefield as consciousness slowly slipped away. His body collapsed into the snow. In his final fading thoughts, despair consumed him. He questioned whether this was truly the end, and if his entire life had carried any meaning at all. Then, a soft warmth wrapped around him. Confused, he believed for a fleeting second that death had arrived. But the sensation was not afterlife. It was snow. He became aware of warmth surrounding him, arms holding his fragile body with an unfamiliar yet gentle touch. His eyes shot open. This was not a dream. Snow still drifted from the sky, but something had changed. Panic seized him the moment he realized his perspective had shrunk drastically. His body felt light, too light. Confused, he lifted his hands. They were small, delicate, the hands of a newborn child. Shock overwhelmed him as realization struck. He was being cradled in someone's embrace. He shifted his gaze toward the woman holding him. Her body had already lost its warmth. She appeared lifeless, as if she had used her final strength to protect the child in her arms. Before he could process the scene, an unknown voice suddenly echoed inside his consciousness, commanding him to search for her. Images flooded his mind. Knights charging through a raging snowstorm. Their horses trampling through a raging snowstorm. Their horses trampling through white terrain train as they shouted that the child could not have gone far. One of them declared under orders from Duke Raddick that the infant must be recovered at any cost. The vision vanished as quickly as it appeared. He stood stunned, struggling to grasp what had just unfolded. The name lingered in his thoughts. Duke Raddick, fear tightened in his chest. The people searching for the newborn were searching for him. Memories resurfaced from a past night buried in chaos and blizzards. When he had first been found, a sudden suspicion formed. Had he returned to the past? He dismissed the thought at first, yet strange flashes of light flickered before his eyes, interrupting his doubts. Even if the truth remained uncertain, one fact was clear. Staying there meant falling back into the hands of the cruel Duke. With the instincts of a veteran warrior trapped in a newborn's body, he forced control over his fragile limbs. He crawled away from the lifeless woman's arms. Desperation fueled his will. Suddenly, golden energy erupted from deep within him. Power surged through his tiny body, responding to his determination to escape. Heat radiated from his hands, melting the thick snow beneath each touch. A glowing trail formed behind him as he dragged himself across the frozen ground. But his newborn body had limits. Exhaustion struck hard. His breathing grew shallow. His limbs trembled as if consumed by fire from within. He collapsed into the snow, unable to move further, yet refusing to surrender. Despite the pain, his eyes burned with resolve. Memories of betrayal surfaced again, the image of his ruthless father turning his back on him. Hatred coiled tightly inside his chest. Clenching his teeth, he gathered the last remnants of his strength and whispered a vow into the freezing air. Raddick, I swear. Energy flickered around his small hands as he crawled forward once more, carving a long mark through the snow until his body finally gave out. Completely drained, he fell unconscious at the feet of a figure standing nearby. A young girl noticed the motionless child first. Excitement filled her voice as she called for her father, pointing at the baby she had discovered. The man, known as Viscount Fred, approached in disbelief. He carefully lifted the infant from the snow, observing the long trail the child had dragged behind him. Confusion filled his expression. How could a newborn survive such harsh conditions alone? Holding the child close, he felt the faint warmth of life and instinctively provided shelter. Safe within the man's arms, the exhausted infant drifted into sleep. Fred continued staring at him in astonishment, glancing again at the path etched across the snow. The evidence proved one thing. This child was no ordinary baby. He silently wondered about the boy's origin and identity. When consciousness returned, he found himself inside a warm room, far removed from the deadly storm outside. Still disoriented, he questioned where he had been taken. Suddenly, an illusion appeared before him. A boy with crimson hair stood in front of him, reaching out as if trying to pull him away. The vision disappeared instantly. A gentle pinch on his cheek pulled him back to reality. Surrounding him were lively young girls observing him with curiosity. One of them excitedly announced that the baby had awakened. The older sister immediately scolded the others, warning them not to hurt his delicate face. Now trapped inside an infant's helpless body, he could only endure their attention. The girls handled him playfully, leaving him unable to resist. The eldest sister, distinguished by her platinum hair, rescued him from the group and held him securely. Though safer in her arms, suspicion lingered in his eyes. Determined not to remain powerless, he suddenly tried to stand and break free. His will was strong, but his body betrayed him. His tiny legs failed and he tumbled forward, landing face first onto the floor. Gasps filled the room. Shocked voices rang out as the girls rushed after the falling child. Panicked, he attempted to crawl away, unaware why they were chasing him. The chaotic chase ended only when exhaustion overtook him again. Viscount Fred quickly scooped him up before he could hurt himself further. Looking at the strange infant in his arms, Fred muttered in amazement that the child truly seemed like someone who had fallen from the sky. Impossible, mysterious, and full of unanswered questions. His gaze snapped upward the moment he realized who was holding him. Shock froze his small body. The man cradling him was none other than Viscount Fred, the younger brother of Duke Raddick. Recognition struck like lightning. Astor's eyes scanned his surroundings in disbelief. Was this another residence of the Elmine bloodline? In his memories from the past life, Igra Elmine, lord of the Viscount's domain and head of a minor branch family, had once stood beside Raddick as one of the so-called twin wings. They were trusted swords of the royal house, powerful figures who guarded the throne together. Yet those memories also carried tragedy. During the civil war that followed, the Viscount's household had been destroyed, and Fred had died along with it. Seeing him alive now confirmed one undeniable truth. He had truly returned to the past. Even so, bitterness twisted inside him, and attempting to escape the Duke's grasp, fate had thrown him straight into the territory of another member of the same cursed family. Irony pressed heavily on his chest. The woman holding him, the Viscountess, observed the strange child with soft curiosity. She assumed his sudden burst of power had caused him to be flung into the snow. Convinced that he was not ordinary, she looked at him gently and wrapped him in her arms. Her embrace was warm, Her voice carried concern rather than judgment. She told the frightened child that everything was safe now and that he had nothing to fear. For the first time across both of his lives, Aster felt something unfamiliar. A mother's warmth. It stunned him into silence. From nearby, Viscount Fred watched the scene quietly before stepping closer. He stated firmly that this child possessed extraordinary power. The proof lay in the mark on his body. The Viscountess carefully lifted the sleeve of the infant's clothing, and a glowing red symbol was revealed. The moment she saw it, her expression shifted to shock. She whispered in disbelief, "The 7 wings?" Aster's body stiffened. He did not understand why that mark had appeared again, especially after everything he had endured in his previous life. Suddenly, memories crashed into his mind like violent waves. Radek's words echoed clearly. The Duke had never intended to raise him as a son. He had taken him in for one purpose only, to steal the power hidden within his body, the 7 wings. From the beginning, it had all been manipulation. He had been branded wingless while his true power was quietly coveted. His wings had been stripped away in his past life. Rage ignited within him. The humiliation, the betrayal, the cruel dismissal. It all resurfaced at once. Noticing the sudden change in the child's expression, the Viscountess turned to her husband with concern and asked what they intended to do with him. Aster immediately understood the danger. If this power remained in the hands of the Elmine family again, history would repeat itself. He could not allow that. He needed control over his own destiny. And more than anything, he needed strength for revenge. Without hesitation, Viscount Fred made his decision. He declared that he would adopt the child. Shock rippled through Aster. He could not believe what he had just heard. The Viscount stepped forward calmly, extending his hand. There was no greed in his eyes, no hidden ambition. He gently placed his palm on the boy's head and spoke with sincerity. The child before him was like a young bird unable to fly. He would raise him carefully, nurture him, until the day he learned to spread his wings and soar freely. Something deep inside Aster trembled. That kindness felt foreign, unfamiliar, and strangely painful. It was warmth he had never received in his previous life. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the hallway. One of the Viscount's daughters had been eavesdropping outside the door. She had fallen, and the others collapsed on top of her in a chaotic pile. Fred turned sharply and asked if only 2 of them had been listening. It turned out all 4 sisters had been secretly spying. The eldest stood up awkwardly embarrassed, claiming they were only worried about the baby. Despite the scolding, the atmosphere remained light. One red-haired girl looked curiously at the infant and asked her mother what name he would be given. The Viscountess smiled softly. Holding the child under the gentle glow of moonlight, she named him with meaning, a name symbolizing a new star rising within their family. Time moved forward. 10 years later, the grand mansion stood proudly as always. Viscount Fred, now visibly older, walked through the estate and was greeted respectfully by a soldier. A carriage waited nearby. The door opened, and a young attendant stepped forward. It was Aster. The helpless newborn had grown into a refined and confident young man. Elegant, composed, power quietly hidden beneath calm eyes. He stepped out of the carriage and politely offered his hand to help the red-haired girl, Alphen, descend. He reminded her gently to be careful. She smiled brightly and thanked him. For a brief moment, her playful expression reminded him of the mischievous child she had once been. Aster watched her quietly, warmth flickering in his gaze. Together they walked toward a major gathering, the sword ball hosted by the Duke's House of Elmine. On the surface, it was a noble event meant to strengthen alliances among knight families. In reality, it was a battlefield disguised as celebration. Each house would present its young swordsman. Reputation, honor, and power would be judged publicly. The moment Aster and Alphen stepped into the grand hall, every eye turned toward them. Whispers spread instantly. Mocking remarks followed. Some questioned why the Viscount's house had adopted a child of unknown origin instead of producing a true heir. Others ridiculed them openly, suggesting the family had chosen humiliation over pride. Hostile gazes measured Aster from head to toe. They doubted his legitimacy. They doubted his strength. They doubted his right to stand there. Aster remained still. His eyes shifted slowly across the hall, observing the contempt directed at him. Alphen squeezed his hand tightly. She warned him not to listen to the cruel whispers. In places like this, weakness meant being crushed. Aster said nothing. His expression did not change. Calm, controlled. He silently accepted the hostility, already treating it as fuel rather than pressure. Fred's voice came from behind him, steady, grounded, and carrying the weight of responsibility. Standing before the towering ducal castle, he explained the current position of their household. He wanted Aster to witness reality as it was, not through comfort but through truth. Then Fred turned slightly and asked if his son felt disappointed by what he saw. Aster shifted his gaze. A faint, confident smile curved across his lips, one that carried quiet defiance. "Not at all, father. This kind of cold atmosphere suits me perfectly." His response was firm. Fred paused for a moment, then laughter escaped him. Pride filled his expression. He appeared genuinely relieved by the boy's answer. At that instant, painful memories surged through Aster's mind. This place, This hall, it had once been the stage of his deepest humiliation. In his previous life, he had stood here defeated, publicly shamed, crushed before everyone. The disgrace of his household had unfolded under these same walls. But things were different now. He had reclaimed the seven wings. Power that had once been stolen from him now burned within his body again. Determination ignited in his golden eyes like a blazing flame. Revenge was no longer a distant dream. It was approaching. Standing beside his father and Alphen, Aster lifted his gaze toward the grand ducal structure looming overhead, heavy with memory and resentment. From an elevated balcony, his former half-brothers observed him. Their eyes carried arrogance and contempt as they looked down on him. They evaluated, they judged. Yet Aster remained composed. His expression did not shift under their scrutiny. Calmness covered him like armor. He silently thought to himself that this would be the perfect moment to step forward and reclaim dignity. A confident smirk formed in his mind. Time to make an entrance worthy of attention. Inside the grand hall, a fierce fencing duel unfolded at the center stage. Nobles watched closely as two young swordsmen clashed. In this era, knights were defined by strength and prestige. Power was proven through mastery of the blade. Reputation was built through influence and family status. The two fighters charged at each other with explosive speed. Steel collided violently. Energy surged through their swords as they closed the distance and delivered a decisive strike. One combatant shattered his opponent's weapon with overwhelming force. The defeated youth froze, disbelief written across his face, before collapsing onto the ground. The victor stood tall. On the back of his hand glowed the emblem of two wings. The blue light radiating from the mark served as undeniable proof of lineage and strength. It was a public declaration of superiority. From the balcony above, Aster watched the scene silently. His gaze remained steady, emotionless. This spectacle was familiar. Intimidation masked as celebration. Power displayed for status. Nothing had changed. Memories of his past humiliation inside this very hall resurfaced. Painful, sharp, and unforgettable. Those memories hardened his resolve even further. Noticing his distant expression, Alphen called his name with concern. She asked gently if he felt nervous. After all, this was his first sword ball. Aster turned toward her and smiled confidently. He replied that he wasn't nervous at all. If anything, he felt nostalgia. His answer confused her completely. She had no idea what past experience could make such an event feel sentimental. At that moment, Fred informed them he needed to attend a meeting and entrusted Alphen to Aster's care. Offended, Alphen immediately protested, reminding her father that she was older by 1 year. Aster lightly teased her, saying she still acted clumsy. Fred then placed a hand on Aster's shoulder. He advised him to use this opportunity to build relationships with other young nobles. Connections mattered. However, his tone lowered as he warned Aster seriously. The secret of the seven wings must never be exposed. Aster absorbed the warning quietly. After Fred walked away, he scanned the hall. Every corner was filled with hostile gazes, whispers, suspicion, open dislike. Forming alliances here would normally be difficult, almost impossible. But instead of retreating, a cold determination settled deeper into his eyes. He began walking forward. Alarmed, Alphen asked where he was going. Without turning back, he answered calmly, to make friends. With steady steps, he descended the grand staircase and approached a group of young nobles sitting on a sofa. The leader of the group, a red-haired youth, looked at him with obvious disdain. He demanded to know who Aster was. Aster responded politely. He bowed slightly and introduced himself with confidence. I'm Aster Elmine. It's a pleasure to meet you, Brother Darius. He calmly declared that he was the younger brother. Darius stared at him in shock. Another young noble named Leo leaned closer and whispered an explanation, clarifying that Aster was the adopted boy from the Viscount's house. The atmosphere instantly shifted. Curiosity mixed with mockery. Attention focused sharply on him. Darius suddenly burst into loud, almost deranged laughter. Now he understood why the adopted boy dared to introduce himself as an Elmina. The arrogance of it amused him. At that moment, fragments of Aster's past life surged through his mind. He recognized them clearly. Darius and Grau, the two heirs of the main Elmine bloodline. The same figures who had once stood above him. The same individuals who had taken his life. In his previous existence, they had cast long shadows over him, powerful, untouchable, and terrifying. Back then, he had felt insignificant before them. But now, under the bright lights of the grand hall, they no longer appeared like unstoppable monsters. They looked like overconfident children playing with authority. The fear that once chained his heart had disappeared. Sensing the rising tension, Alphen quickly grabbed his arm. She called his name with urgency and attempted to pull him away, insisting that the greeting was complete and they should leave. Before they could step back, Darius's mocking voice cut through the air. He addressed Alphen with unwanted familiarity, sneering that she was once again hiding behind her father. He ordered them arrogantly to come closer, as if summoning servants for entertainment. He framed it as an instruction from the main house. Alphen froze. Her body stiffened. Her back remained turned to them, yet anger burned fiercely in her eyes. The humiliation of that command pushed her to her limit. She rejected the demand outright. She declared clearly that there was no master-servant relationship between the main branch and their house. Just as she prepared to step forward and confront him directly, Aster suddenly caught her wrist. His grip was firm. He stopped her before she acted recklessly. Holding her back, he spoke calmly, stating that he had not finished yet. His composed posture sharply contrasted with the hostile atmosphere around them. Beneath his calm expression, hidden motives quietly formed. Darius noticed the restraint. A sadistic grin slowly spread across his face. Seeing an opportunity, he intensified his mockery. He publicly attacked Alphen's father, reminding everyone that although he had been a knight, he had failed to protect the king. As punishment, his own younger brother had severed his arm. Those words hit Alphen like a whip. Shame and pain flooded her expression. She lowered her head, struggling under the weight of the insult. Darius continued relentlessly. He claimed he was grateful that he did not carry the blood of someone so pathetic. The provocation became unbearable. Alphen's fury exploded. She shouted that he must take back his words, refusing to allow anyone to insult her father. In a sudden surge of anger, she lunged forward and landed a powerful punch directly against Darius's jaw. The impact echoed sharply, yet even after being struck, Darius did not stop. Through clenched teeth, he continued mocking her. He insulted the women of her family, calling them useless daughters who could never inherit land. He suggested her father must be deeply disappointed. With a twisted smile, he lifted his wine glass. He coldly reminded her that this was not a battlefield, it was a noble gathering. Then, in a humiliating gesture, he splashed wine directly onto her. Red liquid stained her dress. He sneered that she should wear rags next time so she would not worry about ruining expensive fabric. At that moment, Aster stepped forward. While walking toward them earlier, he had quietly questioned himself. If he saw these faces again, would he feel anything? Would there be anger, hatred, or emptiness? He reached out suddenly and grabbed a nearby wine bottle from an unsuspecting noble. His movements were swift. When he saw Alphen standing there humiliated, bruised, tears forming in her eyes, something ignited inside him. Relief washed over him. He confirmed one thing. He could still feel rage. That emotion had not disappeared. Calmly, he called Darius by name. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he tossed the wine bottle upward. The bottle spun through the air, heading straight for Darius's head. Just before impact, it stopped midair. An invisible force held it suspended. Aster stared at him with pure contempt. He declared that they were still the same worthless people as before. With a subtle gesture, he transformed the suspended bottle into a weapon of retaliation. In the next instant, it shattered violently. Red wine exploded outward, completely drenching Darius from head to toe. The sudden humiliation stunned everyone nearby. Aster stood upright with chilling composure. He towered over the fallen nobles. His sword rested at his side, droplets of blood sliding down its blade. Grau screamed in panic, calling his brother's name as chaos erupted around them. Darius wiped the liquid from his lips, his face twisting in shock and fury. Aster responded casually, dismissing the stain on Darius as nothing more than grape juice. With a twisted smirk, he added that it was the perfect drink for overgrown noble children who acted superior. They refused to believe him. And then, memories crashed into his mind. 3 years earlier, an uncontrolled surge of golden energy had exploded from his body. His father's voice had thundered through the chaos, demanding that he suppress the power before it destroyed everything. Around him, the situation had spiraled out of control. One sister had knelt beside another who lay unconscious in her arms, tears streaming down her face as she begged him to stop. Alphen, his eldest sister, had shouted in fear, urging him to restrain the raging force. Dark power intertwined with radiant golden energy had spiraled violently around him. That was the moment he had truly understood the danger of the Seven Wings. The strength was overwhelming. Even he had barely been able to control it. His father's worried expression resurfaced in his thoughts, questioning whether Aster could ever master such destructive potential. Back then, power had felt like a curse threatening to consume him. Now it was different. He had learned to command it. Suddenly, urgent footsteps echoed through the conference hall. An attendant burst inside in panic, announcing that something serious had occurred. Fred interrupted the meeting immediately, demanding to know what crisis required such disruption. The attendant reported breathlessly that the young members of the main branch and the adopted son were engaged in a duel. Tension instantly spread across the room. Viscount Fred and Duke Ager exchanged sharp glances. Without hesitation, Fred stood up and rushed out. His cape swept dramatically behind him as he hurried toward the source of the conflict. On the balcony, he found Alphen running toward him in distress. She cried out for her father, asking what was happening below. Nearby, a broad noble with a shark-like grin pointed toward the arena. He commented loudly that witnessing a battle between the Elmine heirs was rare entertainment. Depending on the outcome, the consequences could shake the balance between houses. Fred and Alphen leaned over the balcony. Below them stood Aster and Darius, facing each other across the arena. The smirking noble predicted that the duel would quickly turn brutal. His tone suggested that this clash was more than a simple competition. It was a power statement. Inside the arena, Darius unleashed his strength and anger. He shouted that anyone foolish enough to challenge the Duke's house deserved punishment. He mocked Aster as nothing more than a stray dog who failed to understand true power. The emblem of 4 glowing wings shone brightly on the back of his hand. Blue light radiated from the mark, drawing awe-filled whispers from the crowd. Spectators murmured that, as expected, the Duke's son operated on an entirely different level. Darius pressed the tip of his sword close to Aster's face. He demanded that Aster reveal his own emblem. He questioned whether the adopted son was too ashamed to show it. Aster replied calmly. He admitted that bragging about such markings was childish and embarrassing. A faint smile lingered on his lips as he stood unfazed. He added casually that he would never lower himself to display power in such a vulgar way. His words struck directly at Darius's pride. A vein bulged on Darius's forehead. Humiliation burned through him. Enraged by the mockery, he clenched his teeth. Aster then set his conditions. If he won, Darius would publicly apologize to Alphen. Darius immediately agreed, adding his own demand. If he won, Aster would become his servant. He declared arrogantly that he would force him to obey and work like a dog. Without further hesitation, Darius lunged forward. Their swords collided violently. Golden sparks exploded across the arena as steel clashed with steel. The sound of impact echoed through the hall. The duel had shifted from provocation to full confrontation. Aster adjusted his stance, gripping his blade firmly. Wind swirled around him. Dust gathered at his feet. His golden eyes sharpened with focus. As power quietly surged within his body, he prepared for the next assault. Meanwhile, Darius wore a confident smile. He unleashed his energy proudly, proclaiming that this was the strength of someone who truly possessed an emblem. With a fierce roar, he launched a rapid sequence of slashes. Each strike tore through the air, producing sharp gusts that sliced forward like invisible blades. The arena trembled under the force of the attack. From the balcony, Alphen screamed his name in panic as the intensity of the battle surged. Her face had turned pale. The attack unleashed by Darius looked overwhelming. Beside her, the broad noble with a sharp grin only chuckled, commenting that although young Master Darius lacked refinement in technique, his raw magical strength compensated for every flaw. Power exploded from Darius in a violent surge. Those who bore winged emblems possessed a natural advantage, and he intended to prove it. In his arrogance, Darius compared the difference between them. If one wing held the power of a small flame, then 4 wings were like a raging explosion. Flames burst outward from his blade as he unleashed a relentless barrage of blazing strikes. He pressed forward aggressively, forcing Aster back step by step. Mocking laughter followed each advance. He demanded to know what had happened to the confidence Aster displayed earlier. Aster did not retreat in panic. He met every incoming strike with calm precision, raising his sword to block and redirect the storm of attacks. Steel collided repeatedly. Sparks scattered across the arena. Despite the pressure, his posture remained steady. Darius continued taunting him, questioning whether his demand for an apology had been nothing more than empty bravado. Enraged, he roared and poured every ounce of power into one decisive strike, aiming to end the duel in a single blow. From the spectator stands, a mustached noble smirked confidently, declaring that the outcome had already been decided. But at that moment, everything changed. Aster released his aura. His sword erupted in pure white radiance. The clash between red blazing magic and radiant golden light erupted violently. The two forces collided midair. An explosive shockwave shook the entire arena. Energy spiraled outward as spectators shielded their eyes from the brilliance. Darius's expression froze. Disbelief consumed him. His strongest attack had been stopped. Aster looked at him calmly and remarked that he talked too much. With smooth control, he deflected Darius's blade aside and followed through with a swift spinning kick. The impact sent Darius flying across the arena. Aster landed lightly on the ground. Golden energy wrapped around his body like flowing threads. Proof of absolute control. For 10 years inside the Viscount's household, he had trained relentlessly. He had refined his magic in silence, waiting, enduring, preparing for the moment he could repay every humiliation. And now, that moment had arrived. With a sudden upward slash, Aster released a concentrated surge of power. The strike split the air itself. Golden light roared toward the sky as the arena trembled under its force. The impact hit Darius directly. He was thrown backward violently, unable to resist. His body crashed to the ground. His knees struck the floor with a sickening crack as he struggled to stand. Across the distance, Grau watched in shock. He stammered, unable to comprehend how Darius, wielding 4 wings, was being pushed back so easily. Energy in green and gold swirled around Aster, overwhelming everything in its path. Darius's face twisted in disbelief. He shouted in frustration that he possessed 4 wings, that he should not be losing. Aster remained unmoved. His expression was cold and calculating. Golden power gathered along the edge of his sword. Then, in one precise motion, motion, he compressed that power into a single focused point. The crowd gasped. Whispers spread through the hall. Some questioned whether Aster could truly win. Others admitted that Darius was already being dominated. The pressure intensified. Finally, another massive explosion of golden energy erupted from his blade. The shockwave sealed the duel. Silence followed. Murmurs of shock rippled through the spectators. The Elmine house still possessed someone capable of such overwhelming strength, a fact no one could ignore. But the surge of power did not end there. Dark strands of energy began mixing with the golden glow around Aster. His aura expanded violently. From the balcony, Fred and the noble beside him frowned deeply. They muttered that something was wrong. Darius lay on the ground, crushed under the pressure of that terrifying force. Suddenly, a traumatic memory flashed through Aster's mind. He saw again the image of his brother cutting off his arm, laughing like a madman while blood spilled. That memory ignited uncontrollable rage. Back in the arena, dark and golden energy erupted outward in chaotic waves. His face was partially shadowed by the violent surge. Darius screamed curses as he struggled beneath the crushing weight of power. Above, Alphen shouted desperately for him to stop, but it was too late. The seven wings fully unleashed, a blinding explosion detonated at the center of the arena. A massive crater formed where the blast had struck. Dust and debris filled the air. When the smoke finally cleared, silence returned. The broad noble stood with crossed arms, his expression serious. Aster's sword had pierced the ground, stopping mere inches from Darius' terrified face. The blade had halted just in time. Darius sat on the ground, defeated and frozen in fear. Aster looked down at him and calmly returned his earlier insults. He suggested that next time Darius should dress in rags so he would not worry about getting stained. Without lingering further, he turned away and sheathed his sword. Confidence radiated from his back. He declared inwardly that he was no longer the powerless, wingless failure everyone remembered. From the balcony, Alphen watched him with mixed emotions, relief washing over her while awe filled her heart. Aster allowed himself a faint smile. Knowing that his sister was safe was enough to steady his emotions. Suddenly, his golden eyes flickered. A red glint flashed briefly within them. He sensed something new. An unfamiliar presence descended from above, wrapped in dark crimson energy. A figure dropped heavily into the center of the hall, announcing a new and dangerous turn in the situation. Aster's eyes sharpened instantly. He recognized the figure who had descended so dramatically into the hall. Standing at the top of the grand staircase was Duke Radek, the man who embodied authority over the main branch. His presence alone pressed down on the space like an invisible weight. One name escaped Aster's lips: Radek. It carried hatred. It carried resolve. Around them, the nobles remained stunned. They could hardly believe that the adopted son of the Viscount's house had just defeated the third heir of the main family in public. Shock rippled through the hall, but the situation had already escalated beyond a simple duel. Humiliation had been delivered directly to the main branch. There was no way they would stay silent. Slow footsteps echoed as Duke Radek began descending the stairs. He was the eighth leader of the main house, a figure whose authority commanded fear and obedience. On the ground, Darius lay defeated. His eyes flickered with a mix of shame and desperation. When he saw his father approaching, relief briefly flashed across his expression. As if salvation had arrived, dragging his battered body forward, he crawled toward Radek. He clutched at his father's leg and pointed at Aster with trembling fingers. Through clenched teeth, he accused Aster of acting like a stray dog who dared challenge the main house. He begged his father to punish him, to crush him, to restore their honor. Instead of mercy, what followed was brutal silence. Radek's hand suddenly slammed downward, not toward Aster, but directly onto his own son. A deafening crack echoed. Darius screamed in agony as bones shattered under the crushing force. Radek's palm pressed him into the ground without hesitation. The young nobles watching from nearby froze in horror. Confusion filled the hall. They could not understand how a father would publicly injure his own son in such a manner. Grau's face turned pale as he witnessed the punishment unfold. Radek looked down at Darius with cold contempt. He questioned why his son still dared to smile after bringing disgrace to the family name. His tone carried disappointment rather than comfort. From the balcony, Fred and the other nobles shouted for him to stop, but Radek ignored them completely. He declared harshly that someone incapable of avenging humiliation had no right to wield a sword. His hand lifted again, as if preparing to deliver a final blow. Tension froze the entire hall. Darius trembled beneath his father's overwhelming authority. Fear replaced arrogance. Radek then shifted his attention. His crimson eyes locked onto Aster. The fury that radiated from him was no longer directed at his son alone. It was aimed at the one standing at the center of the chaos. He pointed his sword straight at Aster and demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Aster did not flinch. He stood upright, meeting his uncle's gaze calmly. He replied that his cousin had not yet fulfilled his obligation to apologize to his sister. His tone remained steady. Then, with surprising boldness, he asked whether the punishment could wait until the apology was delivered. Radek's lips curved into a mocking laugh. Surrounded by a menacing purple aura, he questioned whether being adopted by Fred had made Aster believe he truly belonged to the Elmine family. Aster refused to show weakness. He responded firmly that he was the Viscount's son, raised under his father's guidance. He emphasized that Fred had taught him the honor of a knight and the responsibility that came with inheriting a house's name. Bloodline did not define pride. Training and conviction did. Radek fell silent for a moment. His expression darkened as he processed the defiant reply. Then, flames erupted violently around his body. He accused Aster of tarnishing the reputation of the main house, the pride of 12,000 knights who stood at the top of power. His anger filled the hall. From the balcony, the broad noble observed calmly. He commented that everyone should understand the weight of such an insult. Beside him, a light blue-haired young man added with a faint smile that this conflict could not be dismissed as a childish dispute. Fred and Heffron's voices rang out urgently. They reminded Radek that his father had once sacrificed an arm as payment for betrayal, a reminder of how far loyalty and punishment had already shaped their bloodline. The atmosphere tightened further. Powerful forces stood face to face, father against adopted son, main house authority against rising defiance. The confrontation had transformed from a duel into something far more dangerous. The tip of Duke Radek's sword pressed directly against Aster's throat. Cold steel, absolute pressure. He demanded to know what Aster intended to offer in exchange for the offense he had caused. Aster did not panic. With steady breathing, he responded respectfully but firmly. He clarified that this had never been a petty quarrel between siblings. It was a formal duel. He had answered insults aimed at his house with his blade. Nothing more. Radek's eyes burned with suppressed rage. The boy's answer was logical and bold enough to defy him openly. Aster met his gaze without lowering his head. He repeated the Duke's own words back to him, stating that anyone who could not avenge humiliation had no right to wield a sword. Then, with unshaken conviction, he declared that he would not surrender even a single inch. From the balcony, Alphen trembled as she watched the confrontation unfold. Fear tightened her chest. Beside her, the broad noble gently patted her head in an attempt to calm her down. The light-haired youth nearby laughed quietly in disbelief, muttering that Aster was only 10 years old. Yet he dared speak to a duke like that. It sounded almost impossible. Radek remained silent for a long moment. His red eye glowed with dangerous intensity. Finally, he drew his sword. His voice turned cold and commanding. He ordered Aster to draw his weapon. For a split second, Aster hesitated. He had not expected the duke himself to escalate the situation so directly. Before he could fully react, the ground beneath his feet shattered. An invisible force launched him into the air. In the next instant, Radek's sword slammed into the spot where Aster had stood. The impact unleashed a massive shockwave. Stone exploded outward. The force rippled across the hall. Alphen covered her mouth, choking back a scream as she witnessed the overwhelming power displayed before her. The gap between them was terrifyingly clear. Suddenly, Fred shouted his brother's name in fury. He interpreted the attack as a cowardly strike and refused to stand aside. With determination, he leapt down from the balcony. Blue light burst from his twin blades as he positioned himself between Radek and Aster. Steel met steel. Their weapons collided in a violent eruption of sparks. A duel between the two house leaders ignited at last. Shock waves thundered through the grand hall. The clash exposed the vast difference in strength between them. Meanwhile, the Viscount rushed toward Aster. A massive stone pillar rose from the ground, blocking Radek's advance and shielding the boy. Fred stared at the defensive technique in surprise and concern before immediately checking on Aster. Aster struggled to his feet. Blood trickled down from a wound on his forehead. His body bore bruises from the earlier impact. Yet his spirit remained unbroken. His eyes burned brighter than before, a mixture of pain, fury, and unyielding resolve. Duke Radek observed the scene with a faint smile. He seemed satisfied with how the confrontation had unfolded. Without prolonging the fight, he turned away. In a single leap, he returned to the balcony beside his defeated son. He left behind a hall scarred by destruction and lingering tension. Fred watched him leave before firmly placing a protective hand on Aster's shoulder. Standing beside his son, he refused to let him face the aftermath alone. Soon after, Fred lifted Aster into his arms. Concern filled his voice as he called his name. Despite the blood staining his face and the pain coursing through his body, Aster managed a faint smile. He told his father that he had fulfilled his promise. He had defended their honor. Fred's expression softened. Pride and relief mixed in his eyes as he praised his son for being magnificent. Meanwhile, Radek walked away with Darius following behind, humiliated and defeated. The broad noble approached Radek calmly and commented that his reaction had been unnecessarily harsh. Radek paused briefly. He explained coldly to his son that if he had allowed Aster to speak freely without consequence, the reputation of the main house would have been damaged beyond repair. What he did, he claimed, was a calculated compromise. Not mercy, not weakness. Strategy. Across the hall, nobles whispered in amazement. They saw a young prodigy who had dared challenge Duke Radek, survived, and emerged stronger in public perception. The mustached noble admitted that although the possibility of internal division within the Elmine family was concerning, Astor's dramatic debut could not have been more impactful. He had positioned himself as a rising force. In the shadows, another duke observed quietly. His expression was solemn. He sensed that change was approaching, a storm powerful enough to fracture alliances and reshape power itself. Back with his family, Astor was embraced tightly by Alphen. Fred stood beside him proudly. Blood marked his skin, yet a victorious smile remained. Astor momentarily felt speechless. Surrounded by people who stood by him, not as tools, not as weapons, but as family. The scene then shifted. The focus moved to the training arena of the Viscount Elmine household. A new chapter of preparation and growth was about to begin. Several knights observed the training grounds as practice unfolded under their watch. Two fighters clashed with wooden swords, exchanging rapid strikes. One of the knights watching from the side offered praise with a relaxed smile, calling the performance impressive. The person receiving that praise was Astor. Around them, other knights whispered quietly among themselves. They admitted that his swordsmanship was frightening for someone so young. His progress had become even more intense since the sword ball. Some recalled how he had defeated the third heir of the main Elmine house. That memory still stirred satisfaction among the Viscount's knights. For years, the main branch had treated their house with arrogance and disregard. Seeing one of their own stand strong against him felt like a long-awaited reversal. As Astor continued his sparring session, he pushed forward relentlessly. One opponent after another fell under his blade. Yet while his body moved through combat, his thoughts wandered inward. At the sword ball, he had proven enough strength to silence those who called his household a disgrace. Still, he understood clearly. That was only the beginning. The true obstacle remained, the main branch, specifically Duke Radek. He knew his current strength was nowhere near enough to defeat that man. A wing crest only represented potential. It did not guarantee mastery. Innate power meant nothing without control. Even now, he could not fully unleash the complete strength of the seven wings. If he allowed that force to erupt freely, it risked spiraling into chaos, losing control and going berserk. That fear kept him restrained. He wished he could test his limits without the danger of losing himself. With one final exchange, he overpowered the last knight standing. His opponent collapsed onto the ground. Surrounding fighters lay defeated. Astor stood tall in the center of the training field, his gaze sharp and focused. He scanned the area and asked calmly if anyone else wanted to challenge him. Before anyone could step forward, a familiar voice interrupted. Alphen appeared at the edge of the field. She scolded him gently, saying he was pushing himself too hard again. She questioned whether he even understood the meaning of rest. Then she informed him that their father was calling for him. Astor agreed immediately and said he would go. As they walked together, he glanced at her outfit and made a casual comment about it. Alphen looked confused at first. He explained that it was unusual to see her wearing that attire since she once disliked it for not being cute. She replied that balance mattered. Watching him train and grow stronger had made her realize she could not remain stagnant either. Her words caught him off guard. He fell silent for a moment. Then she lifted her training sword and pointed it toward him with a confident smile. She declared that when he returned, they would train together for a long time. Astor smiled back. Accepting her challenge, he politely asked her to go easy on him. Sometime later, Astor arrived at his father's office. Fred instructed him to sit. Astor complied, taking a seat across from him with a serious expression. Fred began speaking about the past 10 years since they had welcomed Astor into their family. He admitted that he had considered waiting longer before making a major decision. However, he believed the time had come to move forward. On the desk, he placed a small case. Inside it was a ring. Fred explained that this ring symbolized succession, proof of the next head of the Viscount house. Then he made his declaration clearly. He wanted Astor to become his successor. Astor froze. Shock flashed across his face. Fred repeated the statement without hesitation. He intended to pass the leadership of the house to him. The young heir listened carefully as his father explained further. The branch family stood in a delicate position. Even though they were separate from the main branch, they still carried the Elmine name. They governed territory. They protected people. They bore responsibility for survival and stability. The position of head could not remain empty. It required someone capable. Astor's first concern, however, was his sisters. He asked whether they would agree with such a decision. Fred informed him that his older sisters, who were currently studying at the Knight Academy, would return in 3 days. He planned to announce the succession decision to everyone at that time. As Astor thought about it, two powerful figures surfaced in his mind, Marfa and Kudo. He imagined how they would react. Strong, independent, and likely not pleased. A faint smile appeared on his face. He understood that acceptance from them would not come easily. Kudo, in particular, would react with open hostility. Fred explained quietly that his daughter disliked Aster mainly because he had been born with the blessing of the seven wings. That advantage alone created distance between them. Hearing this, Aster's expression turned serious. After a moment of silence, he made his stance clear. He could not accept the position of successor. Turning slightly away, he admitted his limitations. He still struggled to control his own magic. He described himself as reckless, someone who had nearly destroyed his sister through an uncontrolled surge of power. Inside the quiet study, he stated honestly that he lacked the confidence to persuade an angry sibling, let alone shoulder the responsibility of leading an entire house. Leadership in his eyes required stability. He refused the honor. Fred listened without interrupting. A faint smile formed on his lips. After a brief silence, he finally spoke. He admitted that sometimes he wondered whether Aster truly thought like a child. Ignoring the rejection for now, Fred opened a long wooden case placed beside him. He had originally intended to gift the ring, the symbol of succession, as a reward for Aster's performance at the sword ball, but perhaps this present would bring greater meaning. When Aster saw what lay inside, his eyes widened in disbelief. He asked what it was. Fred revealed that it was the magic sword named Grandblade, a weapon capable of controlling and stabilizing the overwhelming power of the seven wings. It was known as the Devouring Magic Sword. Later, they arrived at a secluded clearing deep inside the forest. Fred declared the location suitable. Aster questioned why they had traveled so far just to test a weapon. Fred responded that caution was necessary. With a slight ironic smile, he reminded Aster that he had a tendency to destroy surroundings whenever his power spiraled out of control. The remark carried truth. Fred then presented the sword properly. He explained that the blade was a legendary artifact passed down exclusively to the firstborn of the Elmine line. He had retrieved it personally from the main house, bringing it specifically for Aster. With a swift motion, he unsheathed it. Aster stared in confusion. The weapon appeared incomplete. There was no visible blade. Fred smiled and explained that the sword activated only when infused with magic. Once mana flowed through it, a crimson ethereal blade would manifest from the hilt. Demonstrating his words, he channeled power into the weapon. Aster watched in stunned silence. The blade formed itself through energy, adapting to the wielder. It was not forged steel. It was power given shape. Fred swung once. A massive shockwave exploded from the strike. Trees split apart. Wind and debris erupted in a violent vortex, carving a wide path through the forest. The destructive capability was undeniable. However, Fred warned him, if someone with weak magical control attempted to use it, the sword would absorb and drain their power relentlessly. It was a devouring weapon in every sense. He extended the glowing crimson hilt toward Aster and asked if he would try. Without hesitation, Aster reached forward and grasped it. Their hands touched briefly, father and son, in silent agreement. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, his magic responded instinctively. Golden tendrils of energy burst from his body. They collided with the sword's crimson core. Power spiraled violently outward. An uncontrollable surge erupted around him like a storm. He felt his magic pouring directly into the weapon, not forced, but drawn in by a magnetic pull. The sensation overwhelmed him. His breath tightened under the pressure of energy exchange. Back at the training grounds, a beam of red light suddenly shot upward into the sky. It pierced through the clouds visible across the territory. Knights watching from afar gasped. One of them wondered aloud if a comet had fallen. Another corrected him, saying the light had risen instead of descended. The phenomenon caused panic and confusion. From a distance, Alphen sensed the disturbance. Although the explanation was vague, she recognized the aura immediately. There was no doubt. That power belonged to Aster. Inside the forest clearing, Aster collapsed to one knee, exhausted. Yet a smile of amazement lingered on his face. He admitted breathlessly that the sword was extraordinary. Fred looked at him with a complex expression, equal parts pride and seriousness. He told his son that the true miracle was not the blade itself. It was the power residing within him. He then revealed something crucial. In the entire history of the Elmine family, no one had ever possessed a seven-wing emblem. Aster stood alone in that legacy. Fred continued walking deeper into the forest as he spoke. If Aster mastered that power fully, if he controlled it rather than feared it, he would surpass even six-winged warriors. He would exceed Fred, and even rise above Radek. The image of Radek flashed through Aster's mind. The memory of that man, powerful, arrogant, and untouchable in his previous life, reignited something deep inside him. A blazing resolve burned in his golden eyes. He wanted to surpass him, not just resist, not just survive, but exceed him completely. Yet his father's voice interrupted those thoughts. Fred spoke with a solemn tone, warning him that power on this scale always attracts conflict. As long as the seven wings remained visible, glowing like an unmistakable mark on his back, people would react in two ways. Some would envy him, Others would hate him. Fred described it like unseen hands trying to drag him into darkness. Certain individuals would attempt to manipulate him for their own gain. Others would see him as a dangerous threat and move to eliminate him before he grew stronger. Fred extended his hand, not as a commander, but as a father offering guidance. He urged Aster to master his strength now, because when the decisive moment arrived, regret would be unbearable if he remained unprepared. His words carried deep conviction. He encouraged his adoptive son to grow stronger, not recklessly, but with control and awareness. Aster looked at his father. Gratitude filled his chest. He grasped Fred's hand firmly. In silence, he made a vow. He would never return to the miserable existence of his past life. Looking directly into his father's eyes, he thanked him sincerely. He promised that he would master the 7 wings, no matter how difficult or painful the process became. 3 days later, the Viscount and his wife stood in the grand hall preparing to welcome their daughters home. The large doors opened. 2 young women descended the staircase. One had short red hair and a bold, energetic presence. The other had long white hair and carried a gentle, composed smile. The red-haired girl proudly announced her return, introducing herself as Kadriaka. After clearing her throat dramatically, she spread her arms wide with enthusiasm, inviting her younger sisters to embrace her. She expected warm greetings. Instead, the 2 younger girls ran straight past her. They threw themselves into the arms of the white-haired sister, Marfa, leaving Kadriaka standing alone in the middle of the hall. She froze, confused. Kudo blinked in disbelief, realizing no one had come to hug her. The younger sisters explained while cuddling Marfa that they avoided Kudo because she always messed up their hair during hugs. Kudo crossed her arms and denied the accusation immediately. She claimed she had perfected night etiquette and would never act so carelessly. Her serious facade lasted only moments. When she saw Alphen, her expression transformed. Joy exploded across her face. With overwhelming excitement, she lunged forward and wrapped Alphen in a crushing embrace, nearly lifting her off the ground. She loudly asked whether Alphen had behaved well while she was away. Alphen struggled desperately, demanding to know why she was being hugged so aggressively. Meanwhile, Marfa noticed something important. Someone was missing. She asked calmly where Aster was. Fred replied with a mysterious smile. He simply said, "That boy?" The vague answer immediately changed Kudo's expression. Her cheerful warmth disappeared. Her eyes sharpened. Cold seriousness replaced her playful attitude. Deep inside the forest, a violent column of red energy exploded from Aster's sword. The power surged uncontrollably into the sky. He struggled under the pressure. The sword demanded more energy than he could safely control. Grinding his teeth, he leaped repeatedly while swinging the blade in desperate attempts to suppress the runaway force. Each strike released shockwaves. Each movement pushed his limits. He was fighting not an enemy, but the overwhelming power itself. The devouring sword reacted violently to his magic, and control remained fragile. At last, exhaustion overwhelmed him. Aster dropped to his knees in the ruined clearing, sweat dripping from his body as heavy breaths escaped his lips. He cursed himself for not being able to fully master the sword. Unnoticed by him, one strand of his hair had turned completely white, a visible sign of the strain his body had endured. He could manifest a blade through magic, but suppressing and stabilizing the true power of the weapon drained him to his limit. The forest around him bore the marks of destruction. Craters scarred the ground. Broken trees lay scattered, proof of how violently the sword's energy had reacted to his attempts at control. As he stared at the damage, he wondered how his father wielded the same weapon with such effortless command. Suddenly, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Playful, confident, teasing. Kudo spoke from behind, remarking that she could clearly see he had been pushing himself to the extreme again. Startled, Aster turned and saw her standing there. He greeted her and asked when she had returned. She responded with a sharp smile, scolding him for not even coming to welcome his older sister home. Raising an eyebrow, she questioned whether he believed himself so important that his family's return did not concern him. She mentioned hearing about the sword ball and the rumors spreading throughout the Night Academy. Their father must be proud, she added casually. Aster brushed off the praise. He insisted that she was the impressive one. Even as an apprentice knight, she had completed difficult missions and distinguished herself. He continued, pointing out that she had even earned the Medal of Honor that year, something rare and significant. Kudo replied indifferently that failing to achieve at least that much would mean she had no right to inherit their father's position. Then her expression shifted. She locked eyes with him and asked directly whether he had rejected the succession offer because of her. Aster sighed. He muttered that their father had already told her. He explained honestly that he did not feel qualified yet to carry such responsibility. Kudo lowered her gaze briefly, thinking over his words. Without another comment, she turned and began walking away. Frustration seeped into her voice. She complained that both their father and Aster were cruel. They knew inheriting the house was her dream, yet they still offered it to him. Her figure gradually disappeared between the trees. Aster stood confused, unable to understand the sudden shift in her mood. Without warning, she spun around mid-step. A powerful blue slash erupted from her blade and tore through the air. The strike cut a massive tree clean in half as if it were paper. The falling trunk crashed down violently, forcing Aster to leap back instantly to avoid being crushed. He landed smoothly and demanded to know what she was doing. Surrounded by an intense aura, Kudo smiled challengingly. She declared that after all this time she would finally test her little brother properly. Her sword rested casually on her shoulder, but her presence radiated seriousness. Panic flashed across Aster's face. He pleaded for her to wait, explaining that his sword was still incomplete and unstable. She responded coldly, asking whether he would give the same excuse to an enemy on the battlefield. The word enemy echoed in his mind. Reality hit. Kudo assumed a combat stance. She reminded him of the knight's creed, to always be prepared for battle. If he hesitated or held back, she warned she would crush him. Her first attack came instantly. It was so fast and powerful that Aster barely managed to evade. He realized immediately that this was not playful sparring. There was real intent behind her movements. As he continued jumping backward to escape her relentless pressure, he understood something terrifying. His own magic was still unstable, and now he had to control it while defending against her full strength. When he saw the determination and killing intent in her eyes, doubt vanished. He had no choice. In desperation, he released the crimson power of the sword. Red energy exploded outward as his blade collided with her blue aura. The clash sent shockwaves through the forest. Lightning-like flashes of light erupted between them. From afar, it appeared as if energy storms were tearing through the trees. Kudo clicked her tongue mid-swing. Her blade carved precise arcs through the air with ruthless efficiency. Despite the intensity, she admitted that he had maintained impressive sword skill. She never expected him to keep pace with her after her growth at the Knight Academy. Aster blocked strike after strike. Each impact pushed him further back. Suddenly, Kudo twisted her stance and unleashed a devastating blow. The force hurled him across the clearing. She declared coldly that his control over mana was weak, far from acceptable. Aster slid backward across the ground, his boots carving deep tracks into the soil as he struggled to absorb the force of the impact. Even so, he forced himself upright. Straightening his posture, he looked at her and muttered that she had not changed at all, still as ruthless as he remembered. His thoughts drifted for a brief moment. Kudo had always been like this. Fiery, defiant, uncompromising. As the only male in the family formally entitled to inherit, and as the bearer of the rare seven-wing crest, he had always stood in a position that separated him from her. That status made him appear superior in structure, but to her it symbolized unfair privilege. She had grown into a force of rebellion, a storm challenging everything she believed was unjust. If he was honest with himself, she was the one person in the family who naturally stood opposite him, almost like an inevitable rival. Without warning, Kudo leapt high into the air. The moment Aster saw her silhouette rising against the canopy of trees, he understood what was coming. Her sword descended like an executioner's judgment. It struck the forest floor with devastating force. The impact split the earth open. A shockwave exploded outward, shaking the surrounding trees violently. Standing over him, she declared coldly that he was unfit to become the next head of the house. Elsewhere, inside their father's chamber, Alphen stood near the window, anxiety clearly written across her face. Her voice trembled as she asked Fred whether it was truly wise to allow them to fight like this. She feared that siblings battling with full intent might cross a dangerous line. Fred responded calmly. He explained that Aster and Kudo were rivals. Fierce, yes, but not reckless enough to permanently harm each other. They understood boundaries. Though Alphen still felt uneasy, she pressed further. She questioned why they had suddenly been summoned back from the Knight Academy. Something about the timing felt deliberate. It did not seem like a simple discussion about succession. Fred opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. The document bore the insignia of the Elmine Main family. The moment Alphen saw it, her breath caught. Fred revealed that it was a summons. The elders who controlled the core authority of the main branch demanded to see their grandchild personally. When she quietly asked whether the situation was truly serious, he answered without hesitation. At worst, they could lose Aster. The statement weighed heavily in the silence of the room. Back in the forest, the duel showed no signs of slowing. Blade clashed against blade in rapid succession. Each collision sent powerful shockwaves through the trees, echoing like a heartbeat of destruction across the clearing. Amid the relentless exchange, Aster shouted at her to stop speaking nonsense. He reminded her firmly that he had already rejected the position of successor. She knew that better than anyone. Irritation flashed across her expression. She raised her sword high and replied that his refusal was exactly what frustrated her. If he had the right to inherit but rejected it so easily, then the position meant nothing. Her blade crashed downward with overwhelming strength. Aster barely managed to block the strike. The sheer weight of her attack sent shock through his arms. For a moment it felt less like resisting a skilled swordswoman and more like holding back the blow of a massive war beast. She pressed forward aggressively. Like wielding a gigantic warhammer, she poured even more force into her assault. trying to overwhelm him completely. At the last possible second, Aster twisted his wrist. He flipped his blade and redirected her descending strike into the ground. The impact exploded beneath them. Dust and debris scattered violently. He stared at her through the smoke and demanded sharply whether she would finally listen. She responded with a faint smile, asking if he was already thinking about escaping. In the next instant, she unleashed her full physical strength without holding back. The force hit him like a cannon blast. Aster was hurled sideways through the air and crashed violently into a nearby tree. The impact shattered bark and splintered wood around him. He coughed up blood, shock flashing across his face. Kudo stood above him calmly. She declared that if all he could do was swing a sword, then he was only third-rate. Even those who relied purely on mana without skill were merely second-rate. True strength, she explained, came from mastering both swordsmanship and magic together. Only then could someone be considered first-rate. She added coldly that she was disappointed in him. The difference between their wing crests directly reflected their mana capacity. Even a single wing could nearly triple one's power. Although she possessed 5 wings, technically inferior to his 7, he avoided confronting her with raw strength. Instead, he relied on technique and careful defense. With a slight smile, she asked whether he lacked confidence in himself, or perhaps he feared losing control again, just like 3 years ago. Her words pierced deeper than any blade. Aster froze. That memory resurfaced without warning. Had fear been silently guiding his restraint all along? Had he unconsciously sealed away his power to avoid repeating that catastrophic moment? For the first time, doubt settled heavily inside him. His gaze lowered toward the sword in his hand. He murmured softly, wondering if this suppression was the reason the blade always felt unstable under his grip. Kudo's expression hardened further. She told him bluntly that he possessed everything she had ever wanted: power, talent, a 7-wing emblem. If he intended to let such blessings decay through hesitation and ignorance, then he should give them to someone who would value them properly. Her killing intent exploded outward. She lunged again, no longer holding back. This time, Aster did not retreat. He stepped forward and met her full-force attack head-on. Steel collided violently. The clash erupted with a thunderous roar that shook the forest. Shock spread across Kudo's face. She was forced backward, her stance breaking as her feet slid across the ground. Disbelief filled her eyes. She could not accept that he had successfully blocked her strongest strike. Aster gave a faint smile and thanked her. Because of her pressure, because of her challenge, he had finally awakened something within himself. Then he surged forward at maximum speed. Kudo narrowed her eyes. Confusion flashed through her mind. Why would he attack so recklessly before stabilizing his blade? Had he already exhausted his mana? The thought seemed impossible as he advanced. Mana flooded into his sword in an uncontrolled torrent. The 7 wings behind his back concealed a vast and almost limitless reservoir of power. He understood clearly that he could not yet manipulate it with perfect precision. So instead of forcing control, he abandoned restraint. He chose to unleash everything. For a brief moment, Aster abandoned precision and technique. He pushed every drop of mana he possessed directly into a single decisive motion. The strike descended like a falling comet, fueled purely by overwhelming power. Kudo reacted instantly. She raised her sword and intercepted the blow cleanly, stabilizing her stance at once. The impact shook the ground, yet she remained upright. Even so, while blocking, she clearly sensed it. Something inside Aster had shifted. His strength was no longer the same as before. After holding the attack, Kudo steadied herself and let out a light, amused smile. She questioned whether he had truly thought things through, or if this was another reckless burst of emotion. Aster met her gaze without hesitation. There was no uncertainty in his eyes anymore. He stated plainly that he had no intention of wasting this second chance at life. This time, he would take back everything he once failed to obtain: the power of the 7 wings, the sword Graham, his rightful position within the family, all the things he had struggled for in his past life, only to lose. He would claim them now. When he said second life, Kudo's body stiffened for a fraction of a second. Shock flashed across her face. Subtle, but undeniable. That single opening was all Aster needed. Mana erupted violently through his blade as he closed the distance in an instant. He leapt high, gathering his strength mid-air, his sword positioned to deliver a finishing blow. Then, suddenly, he vanished from sight. Kudo's eyes widened. She lost track of him in the middle of the movement. But he had not disappeared. He had dropped low instead of remaining airborne, compressing his mana further, forcing it into a denser, tighter current. The pressure around him intensified as he poured everything into the weapon. He declared firmly that there would be no more restraint. Kudo immediately understood. The atmosphere changed. The air grew heavy. She realized the duel was reaching its conclusion. Aster brought his sword down with full force. Mana screamed as it tore through the air in a devastating arc. The strike carried the intent to overwhelm everything in its path. Later, Kudo slowly opened her eyes. Instead of the forest, she saw the familiar ceiling of her room. For a moment, confusion filled her mind. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. Beside the window stood Marfa, quietly observing her. Marfa turned and calmly remarked that Kudo had taken quite a long time to wake up. Kudo pushed herself upright immediately, her voice sharp. She demanded to know what had happened after the duel. What was the result? Marfa responded with a gentle smile. She explained that Aster had carried her back personally. He told everyone that she had simply fallen asleep mid-fight. According to his explanation, fatigue from returning home after training at the Night Academy had finally caught up to her. He claimed exhaustion caused her to lose consciousness. Kudo lowered her gaze. She looked at her sword in silence. That version of events was false. She remembered the final moment clearly. Aster's blade had stopped mere inches from her body. She had felt the crushing pressure of meta powerful enough to split her apart, yet right before impact, he dispersed the energy blade. Only the remaining shockwave touched her, enough to knock her unconscious. At that instant, she understood something without doubt. No matter how intense the fight became, Aster would never intentionally kill his sister, and yet for a brief heartbeat she had believed he might. A faint smile touched her lips. He was younger than her, but his growth had surpassed expectations. He had become an infuriatingly formidable opponent. Suddenly she stood up with determination, gripping her sword tightly. She asked Marfa where Aster was. Her gaze sharpened. She declared firmly that she would not accept a duel that ended in such a way. Next time, they would begin again from the very start, at full strength. Marfa's expression changed subtly. She informed Kudo that Aster had already left the castle. Kudo froze. Marfa continued, explaining that the main house had summoned him earlier that day and he had departed alongside their father. Seeing the confusion written across Kudo's face, she asked whether she truly had not been aware of the summons. Anger immediately flared in Kudo's voice. She demanded to know why no one had informed her. Meanwhile, a horse-drawn carriage moved steadily along the forest road outside the castle grounds. Inside, Aster sat quietly across from his father. Fred broke the silence and explained the significance of the people Aster was about to meet. They were elders, former leaders who secretly supported the Elmine name. Though they had stepped away from public leadership, the retired heads of both the main and branch houses, along with powerful senior figures beneath them, still wielded immense influence. They no longer appeared in public, but their authority operated from the shadows. Fred added that those elders had never once shown interest in Aster after his adoption. For them to summon him now meant the matter was far from ordinary. It carried weight. It carried consequence. Aster listened calmly and responded that the situation likely involved the sword dance assembly. He had heard that the elders valued family honor above everything, above wealth, above reputation, even above life itself. Anyone who tarnished that honor, he said, would be discarded without mercy. His father stared at him in disbelief and demanded to know where he had learned such extreme claims. Aster shifted slightly, momentarily flustered. He replied vaguely that he had heard it somewhere long ago. Then more firmly, he added that he was prepared for whatever awaited him, whether punishment or exile. Silence filled the carriage. Fred asked quietly whether leaving without saying goodbye to Kudo truly did not trouble him. Aster smiled faintly. He explained that their departures had been arranged around similar timing anyway. It was better this way. If he was absent, and if Kudo disliked him, perhaps she would feel more comfortable. He also admitted that because of her challenge, he had finally grasped how to properly wield the Graham sword. Through their fight, he had gained deeper control over the power of the Seven Wings. Now he could channel it with more stability than before. With steady eyes, he told his father something important. No matter what happened next, Fred should not rush to rescue him. He intended to stand on his own. He was ready to survive through his own strength. Fred opened his mouth, clearly prepared to scold him for such reckless confidence. But before he could speak, a voice suddenly rang out from outside the carriage. The tone questioned why Aster was acting so dramatically when he was the youngest among them. Aster's eyes widened. Clinging to the side of the moving carriage was Kudo. Her expression was sharp, stubborn, alive with determination. She stared directly at him as if challenging everything he had just said. Without hesitation, she climbed into the carriage while it was still moving, as if she had always intended to accompany him. Once inside, she immediately turned toward Aster. Her eyes burned with intensity. She demanded to know why he had left without even telling his older sister. Her voice carried anger and disbelief at the same time. She stated that she had heard about the summons issued by the main house, yet neither she nor Marfa had ever received anything similar before. Fred responded firmly, reminding her that she could not accompany them. The meeting with the elders was delicate and dangerous. It was not a situation for her to step into. However, Kudo calmly took a seat beside Aster. Her posture remained steady. She replied that she already understood why she had been summoned back from the Night Academy. Their father needed strong guardians to protect the estate while he was away. She was not naive enough to miss that meaning. Still, her expression grew serious. A summons directly from the main house signaled something significant. It demanded extreme caution. Marfa had even warned that there was a real possibility Aster might not return safely. Aster responded with a relaxed smile, brushing off the concern. He claimed she was worrying too much. He said he was only going there to talk and would come back soon. Outwardly, he remained calm. Inside, however, he understood the truth. The outcome was uncertain. There was no guarantee he would return unharmed. Suddenly, Kudo lifted her hand and pointed directly at him. Her gaze locked onto his. She told him bluntly to listen carefully. Without softening her words, she admitted something straightforward. She hated him. Aster blinked in surprise. She continued without hesitation. She hated that he was born male in a family where that alone gave advantages. She hated that he carried the seven-wing emblem. She hated that everyone treated him as special. She hated that he was stronger than his older sisters. She hated that despite being the youngest, he behaved with maturity and composure. Every advantage he possessed, she despised it. Then her tone shifted. The sharp resentment softened slightly. No matter how much he disliked those unfair privileges, he was still family. He was still her little brother. She stood up proudly, unshaken. She ordered him to return safely so they could settle their duel properly. Next time, they would begin from full strength. No restraint from the start. A faint smile crossed her lips as she added that she would not accept such a cheap victory from him. With that, she leapt out of the moving carriage as effortlessly as she had boarded it. Aster leaned out quickly, startled, and asked his father why she had gone through all this trouble just to deliver that message. Fred watched her figure shrink into the distance. A proud expression rested on his face. He replied calmly that it sounded less like a confrontation and more like a genuine farewell. Aster turned his gaze back. Kudo stood on the roadside behind them, boldly waving at the departing carriage. A quiet smile formed on his lips. Inside his heart, gratitude filled him. He made a silent promise. No matter what awaited him at the main house, he would return. Aster and his father finally stopped before the imposing residence of the Elmheim main house. The gates loomed high above them, iron-bound and immovable. Armed guards approached at once, greeting them with strict formality rather than warmth. One stepped forward and informed Heifried that the head of the family was already expecting them inside. Heifried answered evenly that there was no need for an escort. He was more than familiar with these grounds. The guard did not yield. He stated with quiet firmness that he had been specifically ordered to accompany both of them in person. The air shifted. It was subtle, but deliberate. Aster caught the meaning immediately. This was not a homecoming. A small knowing smile touched his lips. So this was the tone they intended to set. As his gaze traveled across the sprawling estate, memory stirred faintly within him. It had been years since he last walked these paths, years since he had considered this place his own. They proceeded through the main corridors, their footsteps echoing against polished stone. From the open courtyard ahead came the clear ring of steel striking steel. Young knights were locked in intense sparring within the training grounds, movements sharp and disciplined. Walking beside him, Heifried spoke in a low voice. He assumed Aster already understood the nature of the situation. No matter what was said inside, he cautioned, he must not allow himself to be provoked. Aster replied calmly that his composure would depend entirely on how the other side chose to behave. Heifried exhaled quietly, tension evident despite his controlled tone. He apologized in advance, admitting that the most difficult part was still ahead. He instructed Aster to listen carefully. The individual they were about to face was... But Aster's focus drifted toward the arena. Almost instinctively, he searched the field for Darius. He wasn't there. Only Darius's other brother moved among the sparring knights. Heifried continued speaking, warning that if Aster's dominant hand were injured, crushed even, returning to ordinary life would not be easy. The words pulled Aster sharply back to the present. His father glanced at him. "Are you listening?" Aster straightened slightly, masking the brief lapse in focus. "Yes," he replied quickly. "Of course." Before stepping into the inner hall, Aster and his father were required to relinquish their weapons. Without protest, they handed their swords to the guards stationed outside. Aster spoke under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Just for today he would endure. Even Kudo had urged him to return properly, without causing further trouble. The doors parted. A guard announced their presence. Inside the vast chamber, 5 elderly figures awaited them. They were not merely elders, they were the true authority behind the Elmheim name, the power that ruled from the shadows. At the center sat an old man whose presence eclipsed the others. Though age lined his face, his voice carried unshaken dominance. He observed Aster for a long moment before speaking, noting that it had been more than 10 years since he last saw him. He addressed him as his grandson. Heifried immediately knelt on one knee and bowed deeply, greeting him with utmost respect as the 6th head of Elmheim. Aster followed suit. The atmosphere inside the chamber pressed heavily against his lungs. He knew exactly who sat before him. Zenith Elmhine, the sixth head. Even in retirement, he was a force that shaped the family's direction. The elders seated around him were influential figures within the banner. Astor recognized several faces from the sword dance assembly, yet one figure was absent. Roderick was not present. Sensing the flicker of confusion, Zenith calmly explained that Roderick now served directly under the royal family as commander of knights and had no time for insignificant affairs. Matters such as this were left to those who remained behind. Astor reflected inwardly. In his previous life, he had never stood before this man. Now, seeing the assembly gathered without the current head, it became obvious true influence did not fade with titles. Hayfried carefully inquired what was meant by insignificant affairs. A faint, unsettling smile touched the sixth head's lips. He said Hayfried already knew. His tone sharpened. At the sword dance festival, Hayfried's pet had disgraced the family name. Astor immediately understood. So that was the reason. Hayfried responded respectfully, stating that Roderick had personally resolved the incident and declared the matter closed. Zenith dismissed the claim without hesitation. That resolution had been nothing more than public theater. The damage to Elmhine's reputation remained. He continued coldly, taking in a child of uncertain origin as an heir had been a reckless decision from the start. If the boy had remained harmless, perhaps it could have been ignored. But bearing his fangs at the main house crossed a line. Exile was unavoidable, and Hayfried would not be exempt from consequences. Astor rose at once, asking them to wait. He declared that everything had been his own responsibility. His father bore no fault. Hayfried, however, remained silent. Seeing that composure, Astor slowly forced himself still. The sixth head observed him with mild disdain, remarking that the boy clearly lacked proper discipline. Another elder added that interrupting a discussion among superiors revealed poor upbringing. Then Zenith stood. The simple act altered the air in the room. He spoke of the 12,000 knights who carried the Elmheim name. They were loyal, but not unified. Among them were ambitious men who watched the family leadership closely, waiting for weakness. Even within this very chamber, he implied such ambition existed. He stepped forward slowly. All they sought, he said, was stability, and there was no guarantee Astor would not one day bring ruin upon Elmheim. A sword was brought forward and placed before Hayfried. For the first time, Hayfried hesitated. Zenith reminded him of the past, the day he had failed to protect his lord, dragging Elmheim's honor into disgrace. It was in this very hall that Roderick had severed Hayfried's right arm under Zenith's command. The old man's gaze grew colder this time. He ordered Hayfried to prove his loyalty again, by executing the boy. Astor's breath caught. Silence engulfed the chamber. Hayfried declined calmly, respectfully. He said he would sooner take his own life than raise his blade against his child. The word struck Astor deeper than any wound. For a moment, Zenith said nothing. Then his cane tapped sharply against the floor. At once, the surrounding guards unsheathed their swords. The old man's voice turned glacial. "If that is your answer," he said, "then you, your wife, your daughters, and that boy will all perish here today." The judgment fell without hesitation. The Viscount house would be erased. At once, armored soldiers surged forward, steel flashing as blades were leveled at Astor and Hayfried's throats. The air thickened with murderous intent, suffocating at absolute. And yet, Astor did not flinch. The warmth drained from his expression, leaving something far colder behind. His gaze lifted and locked directly onto the sixth head. He asked him a question. Why was the great patriarch of Elmheim so afraid? The shift was immediate. The old man's eyes sharpened. Astor continued evenly, his tone cutting through the tension. Was it not pitiful, he wondered, that seasoned elders would gather in fear of a single boy? If they feared being bitten by a dog they had raised, then exile or execution were options they were free to choose. But if they dared extend that decision to his family, Hayfried's breath caught. He recognized the edge in his son's voice. Astor reached up and slowly loosened the collar at his neck. He pulled his shirt open without haste. "I'm sorry," he said quietly to his father. "I've never been very good at staying quiet." The advancing soldiers faltered. Before their eyes, something began to surface. Across Astor's back, crests emerged one after another, luminous, unmistakable. 7 markings, 7 wings. A violent surge of red-black mana exploded outward, shaking the chamber's foundation. The air warped under the pressure. Tapestries fluttered. The floor trembled beneath their feet. Astor stood there half-clothed, power roaring around him like a brewing tempest. His eyes burned with unmistakable resolve. "If you choose that path," he declared, "then these 7 wings will stand as enemies of Elmheim." There was no bluff in his voice, no hesitation, only open hostility. The storm of mana swirled violently as he held the sixth head's gaze. "Choose carefully," Astor said. The stout count could not take his eyes off Astor's back. His lips trembled as he muttered that it was impossible. A seven-winged crest simply could not exist on a human. Around the hall, the other elders reacted no differently. Shock rippled across their faces. Some insisted it had to be a trick. Others argued that in hundreds of years, no such mark had ever appeared among mankind. The stout count shook his head stubbornly, claiming that even confusing it with something else made no sense. Only Zenith remained composed. At last, the old man spoke, his voice measured. He asked Astor whether he understood the consequences of revealing that crest in front of them. Astor turned slightly, a faint smile touching his lips. He said he understood well enough. After all, the more wings one possessed, the more uneasy people became. Laughter echoed through the chamber. The blue-haired count applauded openly, amused by the tension in the room, and urged the others to continue. Zenith began explaining that wing crests were not mere decorations. Long ago, the spirits had bestowed them upon humans as magical organs. Through generations, humanity had refined and strengthened that gift. Even so, seven wings had never appeared among humans. Only the spirit clan, the origin of all wing crests, had ever possessed such a mark. Astor's expression cooled. So were they implying he belonged to the spirit clan? Zenith replied evenly that, if the seven wings were genuine, such a possibility could not be entirely dismissed. Viscount Harry had said nothing, quietly studying both his son and the elders. Astor's voice hardened. He declared that he was the Viscount's son. Where he had originally been born no longer mattered to him. What mattered was whether they intended to make him their enemy. If the Elmheim family chose to cast him out, he continued, countless night houses would eagerly welcome someone with seven wings. In that case, he would become precisely the kind of threat those fearful of rebellion dreaded most. Rather than push him away, they should keep him close, especially if his potential could one day surpass even Duke Rodri. Silence settled heavily over the hall. Inside, Astor recalled Zenith's earlier words. Elmheim was not united. Division was inevitable. In his previous life, he had witnessed civil war consume the kingdom. If he wished to protect himself and his family in this life, he needed to determine now who stood with him and who stood against him, even if that meant staking everything. Zenith's gaze turned cold. He asked whether Astor truly believed he was worth such a risk, assuming the seven wings were real. Astor's faint smile returned. If they believed the wings were false, he said, they were free to kill him. But if they did, it would mean open hostility between him and the entire house. He was not blind to reality. If Elmheim decided to eliminate him, someone at his level could be crushed easily. Still, he wondered whether they would take the bait. The blue-haired count rose, clapping again. He remarked that the discussion was going nowhere. Instead of arguing, why not test the boy here and now, the stout count panicked and addressed him as Count Maze, demanding to know his intentions. Maze spread his hands calmly. Everyone wished to witness the power of seven wings, did they not? After seeing it firsthand, deciding the boy's fate would be simple. In the residence of the kingdom's greatest warrior clan, there must surely be an appropriate trial prepared. Astor watched Maze carefully. It did not escape him that the man seemed to be nudging the situation in his favor. After a short silence, Zenith agreed. He ordered Astor to follow him, remarking dryly that it was also a grandfather's responsibility to discipline an overly bold grandson. They descended beneath the estate into a cavernous underground chamber. A massive iron structure surrounded a deep shaft that vanished into darkness. Thick chains hung down into the depths. Zenith explained that below lay an old underground bunker linked to the waterways. It had once served as an emergency refuge, now it housed a magical beast. The trial was straightforward. Defeat it. Viscount Hayreed frowned, calling Astor a troublesome child and reminding him that he had warned him to conceal the seven wings. Astor drew his sword, Graham, and smiled lightly. Something so conspicuous could never remain hidden forever, he said. This was as good a moment as any. His father cautioned him not to grow careless. Without hesitation, Astor seized a chain and dropped into the darkness. Above, Count Mace watched with keen interest. Astor landed smoothly in the pitch-black bunker. Though no light reached him, his vision remained clear. Then he saw it, something that made his eyes narrow. A severed head lay nearby. Rodri's eldest son. Zenith's voice echoed down from above. He mentioned that the previous boy had been given a chance to redeem himself, but until the very end, he had done nothing but scream and beg. It had been pitiful. Astor lifted his gaze. Before him stood a massive magical beast resembling a blue lion, its presence filling the chamber with oppressive force. Zenith's voice turned icy as he ordered Astor not to disappoint him, as the other had. The beast let out a thunderous roar and lunged forward. From above, Zenith declared that the trial had begun.
Astor stood silently, eyes fixed on the mansion below, lost in his own thoughts. So the rumors were true. The Elmheim estate truly harbored a magic beast within its walls. He felt a twinge of sympathy for Darius, born into a household overflowing with monsters. His hand hovered near the ground, almost instinctively, when a deafening roar suddenly shattered the silence, shaking the surrounding area. Aster remained composed, his mind already calculating his next move. Then, in the blink of an eye, he surged forward with unbelievable speed. In a single instant, he passed the magic beast, moving faster than the eye could track. The moment his strike connected, the creature's body was cleaved into countless fragments. Observers could barely comprehend the sight before them. After landing, Aster masked his astonishment behind a casual expression and muttered, "Sister Kudo is still far scarier than this." But the moment of reprieve was short-lived. To his shock, the pieces of the shattered beast began to stir, gradually knitting themselves back together. One fragment at a time, the creature reformed, its body whole again as if the previous attack had never happened. Aster's eyes widened, disbelief etched across his features. What is this? No way, an undead? The creature wasted no time. With another bone-chilling roar, it lunged forward once more. A panicked voice echoed from above. Undead? How can something like this exist beneath the mansion? Vicon Hai's exclamation carried fear and astonishment, reflecting the horror of witnessing the monster's resilience firsthand. High above, Zenith Elmheim observed the unfolding chaos with a dark, calculated smile curling across his lips. "They're drawn to the scent of death," he said calmly. "It came here expecting a feast of fresh corpses. No matter how many times we cut it or scorched it, it refused to die. Ultimately, we decided to keep it, as the perfect test for gauging someone's strength." Nearby, a stout elder stared in shock, struggling to comprehend Zenith's cold logic. Even skilled knights struggle to subdue an undead, and you expect him to fight it? You would let the Seven Wings boy die for nothing? Zenith's smile only deepened, his gaze icy and unflinching. If he perishes, it will only prove he was nothing but a bragger. A wing crest without power is no more than decoration. A tense silence followed, the weight of his words settling over everyone present. "Do not worry," Zenith continued, his tone detached. "Even if he falls, we can still find use for him. Perhaps, it will even be more convenient for us." Amid the chilling words, Aster's thoughts sharpened. Watching the scene below, he quietly resolved, "Don't you dare die on me now, Aster." The focus returned to the battlefield. Aster clashed relentlessly with the magic beast, each strike releasing waves of energy that rippled across the area. He analyzed its movements with precision, calculating each regeneration and strike. "No matter how many times I cut it, it barely feels it. Compared to a normal undead, this regeneration, it's beyond insane," he thought, noting the creature's extraordinary resilience. In his mind, undead were already considered dead, but this one challenged everything he knew. Aster remained steadfast, unwavering before the beast, refusing to yield despite the overwhelming danger. Every instinct screamed caution, yet he stood his ground, eyes fixed on the creature as it lurched and roared before him. In his mind, he reminded himself of the standard methods to defeat the undead: burn them under sunlight or purify them with a holy weapon. Failing that, the only textbook tactic was simple: avoid confrontation entirely. But retreat was unthinkable. The thought never fully formed before he rejected it, his resolve hardening. "If I rely on conventional tactics, what use is being Seven Wings?" he considered, his determination intensifying with every passing second. Even against a creature that seemed nearly immortal, Aster's stance never wavered. He squared his shoulders, gripping his weapon tightly, and silently vowed, "I have to prove my worth." With that unyielding resolve, he launched forward, swinging his weapon in a sweeping strike. The force behind it was immense, each movement brimming with raw power as he charged directly at the monster. The impact erupted in a titanic explosion, waves of energy rippling outward, sending dust and debris scattering in all directions. Observers above gasped, their eyes widening in disbelief at the sheer magnitude of the force unleashed. One elder could only stammer, what unbelievable power." Another, equally awed, whispered, "So this is the strength of a Seven Wings." A third voice, tinged with urgency, called out, "What's happening down there? Did he manage to defeat it?" Amidst the chaos, Zenith Elmheim watched silently, his expression unreadable, revealing nothing as he observed the battlefield below. As the dust slowly settled, the figure standing at the center became clear. It was Aster, completely unscathed, still standing resolute, his eyes burning with determination. Zenith's quiet mutter betrayed the slightest hint of disappointment. "What a waste," he murmured. Before anyone could react further, the magical beast lunged again, faster than the eye could track. In an instant, Aster found himself beneath the towering creature. Its monstrous form loomed above, and it released a deafening, bone-shaking roar, its terrifying face filling the space right over him. Count Heiferd's voice rang out in a panicked shout from above, calling Aster's name with desperation. His fear was palpable, every syllable trembling as he watched the monstrous attack unfold. But the blue-haired boy's calm voice cut through the chaos, steady and unwavering. "Please, don't make this worse by rushing in to save him, Lord Heiferd," he said, eyes still fixed on the battlefield below. Vicon Hai spun toward him, fury blazing in his gaze. "You want us to just watch him die?" he roared, anger lacing every word. The blue-haired boy, unfazed, raised a hand in a measured gesture and spoke firmly. "Calm yourself. Take another look," he urged, his voice carrying quiet authority. He knew something the others hadn't yet seen, a trump card still in play. All eyes shifted downward once more. There, amid the devastation, stood Aster. His body bore the marks of the previous attack, battered and bruised, yet he remained upright. Even more shocking, a faint, determined smile played across his face. Mutely, he assessed the battle. "Good. Seems to be working as expected, a little leaner than before." Slowly, he lifted his sword, the movement deliberate, his intent unmistakable. In the next heartbeat, a surge of energy erupted from his blade, shooting skyward like a blazing pillar. The raw force of it was blinding, overwhelming the creature in front of him in a single, unstoppable strike. The monster was annihilated instantly, reduced to nothing under the sheer power of his attack. Aster's voice rang out, fierce and resolute. "This ends only when you die." Below, Count Heiferd froze, wide-eyed, unable to look away. That's the technique I taught him once," he thought, memories flickering through his mind. Yet as he studied the attack more closely, doubt crept in. No. It's different, something entirely new. The energy from Aster's strike continued to surge across the battlefield, radiating with an intensity that even the observing elders could feel. The ground trembled under its weight, stones and debris rattling as the shockwave spread. Alarmed, one elder shouted, "This place won't hold much longer." Another urged the others, "Move. Quickly." Panic rippled through the assembly as the destructive power threatened to collapse everything around them. Amid the chaos, one figure remained composed. Zenith Elmheim watched silently, his gaze cold and assessing. Finally, his voice cut through the noise, calm and detached. "So, this is the power of the seven wings." The nobles surrounding the arena erupted into confusion and alarm. Murmurs spread quickly through the crowd as everyone struggled to comprehend the sudden outcome of the battle. Moments earlier, a powerful magic beast had dominated the field, yet now it had vanished without a trace. The spectators exchanged uneasy glances, each trying to understand what had truly happened. Standing among them, the great elder observed the scene in silence, his expression filled with disbelief. While the others panicked, his mind rapidly pieced together the events he had just witnessed. From what he could determine, the undead creature had been caught inside a violent vortex of magical energy. The immense power had twisted and crushed the beast until it was completely destroyed. What surprised him most was not the destruction itself, but the manner in which it had happened. There had been no delicate technique involved, no refined control over magic. The attack had simply been raw power unleashed with overwhelming force. The density and sheer volume of magical energy had been so great that the creature had been torn apart without resistance. For someone who possessed the power of the seven wings, such a result was not impossible. Still, even the great elder had not fully expected the outcome to unfold in such a dramatic fashion. While continuing to analyze the situation, his gaze shifted toward Aster's father. A thought crossed his mind. Had this entire event been carefully arranged beforehand? Aster's father, however, appeared just as stunned as everyone else. His expression revealed both surprise and unease. Deep down, even he had not anticipated that his son would display such overwhelming strength. Watching the aftermath, he silently admitted to himself that Aster had grown far more powerful than he had realized. Not far away, the blue-haired count stepped forward and addressed the great elder with respectful composure. His voice carried calm authority as he gently steered the conversation back toward the purpose of the gathering. The test had been conducted. What remained was the final judgment. He politely asked whether Aster's performance was sufficient to pass. The great elder remained quiet for a moment before responding. His face grew serious as he scanned the nobles around him. From his perspective, there was no reasonable objection anyone could raise. The outcome had been clear. With that understanding, the test was complete. Hearing the answer, the blue-haired count turned toward the arena below. His voice carried across the area as he informed Aster that the trial had been successfully completed. He then invited him to return. Down in the field, Aster looked around at the scattered remnants of the battle. A faint smile appeared on his face as he considered the situation. He explained calmly that the chain he had used earlier to descend into the arena had been destroyed during the fight. Because of that, he asked if someone could lower a rope so he could climb back up. The tension slowly faded as the event reached its conclusion. Later, in a quieter place away from the crowd, Aster found himself standing across from the great elder. The two spoke privately. The elder regarded him carefully before speaking. Opportunities like the one that had just appeared were extremely rare. If Aster allowed it to pass by, there was no guarantee that such a chance would ever come again. Aster listened without hesitation. His answer came calmly and without any trace of doubt. He explained that he had no intention of competing for the position within the main family. From his perspective, if someone like him continued to remain in the main mansion, his cousins would never truly feel secure. Because of that, he believed his place was better suited within the Highfried household. The moment he finished speaking, the great elder suddenly laughed. The sound echoed sharply, though it carried an unusual edge. To the elder, Aster's words sounded humble on the surface, yet they could not hide the ambition that shone clearly in his eyes. Hearing this, Aster froze for a moment. He quickly realized that the elder had seen straight through his intentions. The great elder then shifted his gaze toward Legoso and spoke again, this time with a much heavier tone. He raised a troubling question. Did Legoso intend to one day turn his blade toward Elmheim itself? The words carried a deeper meaning. It hinted at the possibility that Legoso's true target in the future might even be Roderick, the head of the house. The sudden implication caused tension to rise in the air. Seeing the reaction, the elder chuckled lightly and waved his hand dismissively. There was no need to become so defensive, he said. For now, he had no intention of pressing the matter any further. Aster, however, found the conversation confusing. He questioned why the elder would even suggest such things when the rebels were supposed to be their enemies. The elder calmly explained the truth. Even within their own faction, unity was far from perfect. Roderick himself possessed an extremely strong and dominant personality. Because of that, Aster's presence served as a balancing force. Simply by existing, he placed a natural limit on Roderick's influence. In that sense, the elder admitted that Aster's role was acceptable. But the old man's voice soon grew colder. If Aster ever dared to turn his fangs toward him, the consequences would be obvious. The warning was clear. Hearing those words, irritation stirred within Aster's chest. Inwardly, he cursed the frightening old monster of Elmheim. Soon after, their conversation ended. Aster returned to where his father was waiting. His father immediately asked whether the discussion with the great elder had concluded and what exactly had been said. Aster answered calmly. The elder had offered him a chance to join the main family. However, he had refused. The response shocked his father. To him, such an opportunity was incredibly valuable, and refusing it felt like wasting a rare blessing. Nearby, the blue-haired count added his own opinion. If Aster had officially joined the main family, he would have gained far greater resources and influence than he currently possessed. Aster then turned his attention toward the count. After studying his face, he recognized him as Earl Mays. Curious, he asked why Lena had earlier made a proposal that seemed to support him during the event. The count appeared slightly embarrassed by the question. He explained that the suggestion had merely been intended to irritate Lin Poco, whose arrogant behavior had annoyed him at the time. However, he quickly changed the subject and pointed out something far more significant. From that moment forward, both in name and in reality, Aster had become someone who possessed the 7 wings. He gestured for Aster to look around. The surrounding nobles were already whispering among themselves. Among them, the meaning of the event had become clear. This was what it meant to witness the rise of someone with the 7 wings. As the nobles quietly discussed the situation, various thoughts began to emerge within the crowd. Some of them looked at Aster with burning desire, believing that such incredible power must somehow be brought under their control. Others viewed the matter with colder calculation. To them, a different conclusion formed. Before Aster could grow strong enough to become a serious threat, it might be wiser to eliminate him while he was still young. Many of the nobles continued observing Aster with calculating eyes. In their minds, numerous possibilities were already forming. Even if they could not control him directly, there were still many ways someone with his potential could be used to their advantage. Noticing the subtle shift in the atmosphere, Count Maze quietly stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on Aster's shoulder. His gesture appeared friendly, yet his words carried a serious undertone. He reminded Aster that possessing the emblem of the 7 wings was not something ordinary. The symbol alone carried tremendous reputation and influence throughout the noble world. Because of that, from this moment forward, far more people would begin watching him closely, some out of admiration, others for entirely different reasons. Aster studied the Count's face carefully. After hearing that warning, he could not help wondering whether Count Maze himself was also one of those observers. The blue-haired Count seemed to understand the thought behind Aster's gaze. With calm honesty, he revealed another detail about himself. Despite appearances, he was actually one of the board members responsible for overseeing the Knights' Academy. He then casually gestured toward several other nobles standing nearby. According to him, part of their responsibilities involved testing, challenging, and sometimes even creating obstacles for promising young individuals. Among the men standing there, he mentioned, at least one held the same position as he did. After saying this, the Count began walking away. As he turned to leave, he added that he looked forward to the day when Aster would officially enter the academy. His voice carried quiet confidence as he assured him that their paths would cross again soon. Aster watched him disappear into the crowd. For a moment, he reflected silently on the encounter. The man was certainly unusual. For now, it felt far too early to consider someone like him either a friend or an enemy. Shortly afterward, Aster felt another hand rest on his shoulder. His father stood beside him, smiling with quiet pride. He suggested that it was time for them to leave as well. After all, there were still people at home who would want to hear about what had happened that day. He mentioned that Aster's sisters would surely be excited to hear about the impressive display of power he had shown. At those words, Aster gave an awkward smile. A troubling thought crossed his mind. If his mother saw the injuries covering his body, there was a good chance she might faint from shock before hearing the full story. Not long after the event, reports began spreading throughout the noble households. Eventually, the information reached the captain of the knights, who also happened to be Aster's uncle. A knight approached him respectfully and delivered the report. According to the message, a young noble named Dares had died during a test imposed by Sir Zennis, the other. The captain listened quietly, showing little reaction. He simply acknowledged the information with calm indifference. The knight then continued speaking. He had also heard that Hyfried's son had been summoned by the elders of the head family. The captain turned his attention toward the messenger and asked what had happened afterward. For a brief moment, the knight wondered silently whether the captain truly felt nothing regarding the situation. After all, the boy being discussed was technically related to him. Nevertheless, he pushed the thought aside and continued his report. As expected, the elders had confirmed something extraordinary. The boy possessed the power of the 7 wings. The knight could not hide his surprise. He asked whether the captain had already known about this fact. The captain remained thoughtful for a moment before speaking. If events continued in this direction, the delicate balance of influence that had existed within the Elmheim family for generations might eventually begin to crumble. Hearing this, the knight suggested that perhaps they should take action before matters escalated further. However, the captain dismissed the concern almost immediately. He calmly stated that if Elmheim could truly be shaken by an obstacle of this level, the kingdom itself would have already disappeared from history long ago. His tone remained relaxed, though the meaning behind his words was far from casual. While he was not in any hurry, he believed that sooner or later the power of the 7 wings would belong to him. Until that day arrived, he intended to let the boy live freely. In fact, he found the situation somewhat amusing. Watching how long the escaped child could survive on his own might provide some entertainment. When the time finally came, he planned to personally deal with the boy who carried the power of the 7 wings, Aster. Time passed. 4 years later, the scene shifted to the grounds of the Knights Academy entrance examination. The area was crowded with hopeful applicants gathered from across the kingdom. Groups of candidates stood in long lines while knights moved among them, directing everyone toward the registration points. The examiners loudly announced instructions to the crowd. All applicants for the Doracel Knights Academy entrance examination were required to complete registration before proceeding to the next stage. Candidates were urged to move quickly once they finished their paperwork so the process could continue smoothly. As more more applicants gathered, a young man appeared among the crowd. The moment people noticed him, whispers began spreading through the surrounding groups. Several candidates stared in surprise, recognizing the face immediately. Some murmured that the person standing there looked exactly like the famous individual they had heard about. Others were doubtful, claiming that the Aster they remembered had once been far more overweight. The rumors continued circulating as the examination process moved forward. Meanwhile, the examiner responsible for registration calmly continued his duties. He explained the formal conditions of the entrance exam to each applicant. Neither the kingdom nor the Knight's Order would accept responsibility for any injuries or accidents that might occur during the examination. Anyone who wished to participate had to sign a document confirming that they accepted this condition. After completing the signature, applicants were also required to present their wings emblem as proof of magical ability. Without magic, the academy could not accept them as students. The process continued steadily until the examiner reached another name on the list. He prepared to verify the emblem belonging to a particular applicant. The name written on the document was Aster F. Elmheim. As the examiner looked up to check the candidate standing before him, he suddenly froze. Shock filled his face. Standing there calmly was none other than Aster himself. A faint smirk appeared on the young man's lips. The examiner had asked him to reveal his wings emblem. However, Aster explained with casual amusement that his emblem happened to be located in a rather inconvenient place. Because of that, he wondered if it might be possible to simply confirm his identity by looking at his face instead. The exam venue was packed, a crowded space buzzing with students and cadets. Aster's eyes drifted over a few pupils chatting casually with one another. But before he could move further, a voice called out sharply, "Hey, you, the smug-looking guy, right there." Aster turned. A man had approached him, waving his hand dismissively. "I've never seen your face before. Don't know which noble house you come from. Aren't you in the wrong place?" The man exuded trouble, a brash, arrogant air that marked him immediately. His name, Aster quickly realized, was Vigor Smites. With a flourish, Vigor displayed a symbol proudly on his chest. "This," he said, "is the mark of the elite among the Glory Knights. And this," he gestured around him, "is the selection exam for Glory Kingdom Knight Cadets. You understand that, right?" Aster's voice cut through the man's words, cold and indifferent. "Then there is no problem." Vigor froze, utterly stunned. His mouth gaped open for a moment, then he sputtered, "Hey, you little rat. Wait a second." Straightening, he raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Everyone here has gone through strict, grueling training, yet they still dream of walking the glorious path of the Allied Knights." The surrounding cadets and pupils listened carefully as Vigor continued, pointing directly at Aster. "Taking this exam over and over again. And look at you, hanging a child-sized sword on your hip. This isn't a place for a field-gilling swordsman like you." He waved dismissively. "Come on, if you're just here to sightsee, go home, little kid. Just, fuck off." From behind, two students glanced at each other. The red-haired one muttered, "He's at it again. Smith, the new guy, always looking to bully someone. Never seems to tire of it, year after year." The boy beside him leaned closer. "More importantly, the one he's messing with. Isn't that the rumored Elmheim?" Both turned their gaze to Aster. "You mean, Aster of the Seven Wings?" Suddenly, a voice called his name. "Oh my." A young man stepped forward, bowing slightly. "I was wondering who it was. Cousin Aster." Aster's eyes narrowed as he took in the newcomer. The boy was short-haired with striking orange hair, his expression an awkward mix of respect and annoyance. "It's been a while, cousin," the boy said. He hesitated briefly, then added with a smirk, "Since no one seems to know when or where you were born, I've taken the liberty of calling you cousin." Aster's glare was sharp, icy. "Holy shit," he thought, feeling the weight of the moment. Aster's glare lingered on his cousin, and he replied lightly, "It's a shame about Derek." His cousin, however, shrugged dismissively. "No, don't worry about it. A disgrace like him deserves to die. Honestly, I feel refreshed now that he's gone." Inside, Aster thought bitterly, just because he was a year older, he always acted so bossy and threw his weight around. He was a nuisance to me, too. Yet outwardly, he smiled widely. "I don't know if you're Seven Wings or whatever, but you'd better not underestimate a pupil from the main house." When Vigor's words came next, Aster ignored them completely, as if the arrogant fool didn't exist. Darius, Aster's cousin, however, spoke darkly under his breath. "Like bitching behind Esther, because there's no one left to protect you here." Nearby, other students whispered, examining the situation. "That pupil from Elmheim. Rotten luck," one murmured. "Look at this," another said, "main house and branch house still at each other's throats. I don't even know who's going to get dragged into this mess." The tension surrounding Aster was palpable. Then, unexpectedly, Vigor's posture changed completely. He straightened nervously, almost like a subservient dog, and asked with a stammer, "Esther, wait, are you? No, perhaps, without a doubt, are you Elmheim?" Esther looked up at him, expression unreadable. Then, casually, he smiled. "Just Esther is fine, senior." He extended his hand slightly, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. At that moment, the first exam venue officially began. High atop the building, an instructor shouted to all the cadets, "Gentlemen, well done on making it here. First, I want to express my gratitude for your courage and patriotism. We, the Kingdom Knights, are not like those provincial knights frustrating the countryside. We serve the king." His voice rang out, full of determination. "We protect the king. We are the glorious sword, risking our lives to fight for him." All the cadets turned to face the instructor, absorbing every word. He continued, his gaze sharp and commanding. "We have no need for dull or blunt swords. Treat today's exam as a battlefield. Show us your true worth to the fullest." A moment later, a voice called out from inside the hall. Ridiculous, Astor thought, yet a smile tugged at his lips. "I've finally made it back here. The path to becoming a kingdom knight. A ride I wasn't even granted when I wished for it." He chuckled quietly to himself, imagining the world beyond this exam, the realm of the strong he had never been able to reach. And at the apex of it all still ruled one man. In his mind, Astor pictured the general commander, Rod Derek Elmheim. "I will become stronger than everyone in this crowd," he resolved. Astor whispered under his breath, determination flaring. "Wait right there, Rod Derek. I'll catch up to you in no time." "I will do that. First, I have to pass this selection exam." The instructor stepped forward, holding up a spear as a symbol. "Now, then, let us begin the first exam. This trial is a head-on attack test." Before anyone could react, a sharp arrow shot through the air, striking a cadet directly in the head. He collapsed instantly, unconscious. Fear rippled through the remaining students. "The first trial is the Arrow Tower," the instructor announced. His voice carried over the chaos. "The last one standing among you will be the winner. This is the beginning of the first trial. Show us who survives, who proves their worth." Suddenly, the sky above the castle seemed to pour arrows, a relentless shower raining down on the cadets. All eyes darted upward as arrow after arrow streaked through the air. Some pupils tried to dodge and run, shouting, "What are we supposed to do about this?" "Run. We'll die if we stay here," others yelled. A few attempted to intercept the long arrows with their swords, coordinating with one another. "Group up. Watch each other's backs. Block the arrows." The instructor observed calmly, a hint of approval in his eyes. As expected, the veterans from previous exams know what they are doing. He paused, analyzing the scene. Yet even so, only about 30% succeed with these superficial countermeasures. Their limits will quickly be reached. The arrows continued to rain with unrelenting force and energy, striking the cadets and testing their reflexes. "What we want to see," the instructor said, voice carrying over the chaos, "is the overwhelming problem-solving ability, the kind that one from House Elmheim can achieve." Some cadets and pupils looked up at Astor, standing calmly in the center of the chaos. "Why is that idiot just standing there? Has he fainted from fear?" A smirk tugging at his lips. "Just die and turn into dog shit like that," he thought coldly. Suddenly, his hand shot to the hilt of his little sword. Sharp golden energy leaked from his grip, coiling around his arm like fire. In the next instant, as he unsheathed the blade, a beam of red energy surged along its length, extending the sword far beyond its normal size. The red aura pulsated with power, vibrant and dangerous. Closing his eyes, Astor moved with precision. Every arrow in the air shattered before reaching him. One by one, his technique deflected them effortlessly. The cadets and pupils around him froze, their eyes wide at the terrifying display. Raising the sword high, Astor unleashed a beam of red light upward. The energy twisted into a tornado, arrows spinning like leaves caught in a storm. With a single, destructive sweep, all the arrows were obliterated before they could reach him. Astor's smirk widened, victorious. "Bring all your arrows upon me," he said, his voice calm yet commanding, as if daring the chaos to challenge him. The battlefield was engulfed in utter chaos. The moment Astor activated his technique, countless arrows filled the sky, only to be completely blocked by an invisible force. Red energy surged and floated across the entire arena like a raging storm, twisting violently in the air. The violent updraft created by Astor's mana manipulation turned the testing ground into a tempest of swirling power. Garaon stared at the scene with wide eyes, his face twisted in disbelief. "Hey, that bastard! What kind of monster is he?" he shouted, his voice cracking with shock. "Not a single arrow is reaching his body. None of them even managed to pierce Astor." Beside him, another cadet stood with his arms crossed, watching the spectacle with clear excitement. "That guy, Astor, he's manipulating the mana. He created an updraft," he said, his tone filled with admiration. What incredible mana manipulation technique. This is chaotic, like a storm. Aster stood at the center of it all, his presence terrifying. The red energy continued to swirl violently around him while many other cadets struggled desperately against the powerful storm. Some were barely able to stay on their feet as the fierce winds and mana pressure battered them relentlessly. One exhausted cadet looked up, breathing heavily. Did it stop? Is the arrow trap finally over? The cadet standing above him glanced upward and replied calmly, "More of them survived than I expected, but well." Suddenly, the instructor's loud voice cut through the chaos, commanding everyone's attention. "All cadets, way to show some guts, gentlemen. Look at the corpses around you. Those of you who are still standing have passed the first trial." All the surviving pupils listened carefully, their bodies still trembling from the ordeal. The instructor continued without pause, "There is no time to rest. I will now guide you to the next trial ground. Follow me." One completely exhausted cadet muttered under his breath, "Talk about a real sergeant from hell." He felt as if he had just walked through hell itself. Turning to Aster with a tired voice, he said, "Even though we just endured a rain of arrows, that was real hell." Aster simply smiled and replied carelessly, "What? Are you completely exhausted already, senior?" The senior froze for a moment, staring at Aster in pure surprise. "Why are you acting so completely unfazed?" At that same moment, the instructor quietly observed all his cadets. His gaze lingered particularly on Aster. Internally, he thought with astonishment, he doesn't show even a hint of fatigue after expending all that mana. "Aster of the 7 wings." The instructor continued speaking with a firm voice, addressing the exhausted cadets. "Let's show how you can fight in the next trial." At that moment, Aster's cousin glared at him with clear hostility. A flash of past memories surfaced in Aster's mind, moments spent with one of his former teachers. What's that about? What a pain, he thought. He recalled the exchange involving his original sword, yet he pushed the memory aside for now. Aster turned to look at his senior and asked, "What is different before?" The senior replied calmly, "The swords that mid-ranking knights carry are not all that different anyway. It's just a guess, but they are probably on guard because of that weird sword of yours." The senior's eyes shifted toward the unusual sword Aster was holding. Aster gripped the sword tightly in his hand, glaring at it for a moment before letting out a deep sigh. Suddenly, his cousin spoke up with a mocking tone. "Just what I did not expect from my pretty cousin. It seems you have already tamed yourself into a lackey." The senior guy was taken aback by the sudden insult. "Who is a lackey?" he shot back. "If I recall correctly, you are the heir of the House of Baron family. Am I right?" But Aster's cousin completely ignored the senior's words. A mockingly smile spread across his face as he continued in an insulting manner. "A third-rate countryside noble like you is just a shitty. You will learn a painful lesson if you wag your tail at the wrong person." The senior was completely surprised and shocked by such rude behavior. He trembled slightly as he spoke. "Hey, hold on a second. Please wait, young Master Garen. As you can see, I have absolutely nothing to do with a guy like him." Aster watched the entire situation unfold and simply smiled to himself. Somehow this is creating a bad atmosphere around here, he thought. It seemed the senior and his follower dogs were simply following their owner's ways. Then, the instructor suddenly shouted with full determination, drawing everyone's attention once more. "Gentlemen, I will now explain the rules for the second trial. The second trial is a siege battle. You will be divided into 3 teams and will battle for control over each other's camps within this forest." All the cadets listened carefully to every detail. The instructor continued, "A camp is considered occupied when your team's flag is raised on its flagpole. The team that occupies 2 or more camps by the time the evening bell rings will be declared the victor. Any action that renders the flags themselves unusable, such as destroying or defiling them, is strictly prohibited. However, there are no other prohibited actions. You should consider the swords distributed to you as carrying a permit that says you may slash and kill your enemies." The instructor then waved the flag he was holding and shouted with visible excitement, "Now I will announce the team members you will be taking the trial with." All the cadets looked up, their faces filled with excitement for the upcoming battle. Even Aster focused sharply, his gaze intense as he prepared himself. The trial was truly about to begin. Suddenly, Aster spoke up. "The smoke signal has gone up. It is the signal that the trial has begun." He looked toward the blue flag and explained, "There are 3 flags per camp. To win, we need to capture at least 2 camps, including our own." The senior standing nearby thought for a moment before speaking. "Doesn't that mean out of the 3 teams, only 1 team can pass the trial?" "That's what it means, right?" Aster replied calmly, that's right. But is there something you are worried about? Another cadet interjected nervously. That means we will have to fight Elohim, right? The guy beside him added with clear anxiety. That's a bit much, you know. Aster looked at them questioningly. The senior then explained, don't you get it? We are terrified of Elohim's retaliation. Our opponent is the young master of the main Elohim family. Even if this is just a trial, merely pointing a sword at him would probably mean we could never proudly call ourselves knights again. He continued, his voice growing heavier. The worst scenario is that our entire families could face retaliation and be slaughtered. It is a very real possibility, and nobody wants to make an enemy out of that family. Aster was completely shocked by these words. The senior added, because our opponent is the young master of the main Elohim family. Sharply, Aster cut in, then are you giving up on this second trial? The senior replied without hesitation, there is always the next trial. It is better than throwing away the rest of our lives right here. He looked visibly scared as he glanced at the students behind him. You probably would not understand the situation. The feeling of being just weaklings, I mean. Aster ignored everything around him. A smile formed on his lips as he suddenly started running forward. To think I would end up isolated in the team battle. Inside, he thought carefully, but it makes sense. I had forgotten, but to the knight. That is what the Elohim family truly is. A family of tyrants that absolutely cannot be defied. And Garen, my useless cousin, is the symbol of that terror. He reflected on the senior's words. The man was completely terrified of losing his family and did not want to go against Garen or that tyrant family. But at that moment, Aster thought, Tyrant this, all the fucking shit. Still smiling, Aster continued running toward his destination. From an outsider's perspective, I am ultimately just one of them too. The forest remained awfully quiet. No one had engaged in combat yet as he ran to reach his first objective. But suddenly, Aster stopped in his tracks. He looked ahead and spoke calmly. They are just being more cautious. At that moment, a boy who had been waiting stepped forward and coughed lightly before saying, to think you actually came here all alone by yourself. I suppose this means everything has gone exactly as he predicted up to this point. The boy stood directly in Aster's path. Aster looked at him with surprise and asked, and why did he take down his own camp's flag? The mysterious boy smiled and replied in a calm yet enigmatic tone, I just so happened to get some free time myself. Without hesitation, he threw up his own flag and declared, so now, I will be your opponent. Aster was stunned as he stared at the raised flag. What is the meaning of this? He demanded. The opponent grabbed his sword, preparing for the fight that was about to begin. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, Garen stood with his battling group. A creepy smile spread across his face as he spoke darkly, Aster, my cousin. I will show you the Elohim way of fighting.